And we're now officially live, and hello there, everyone. Ave, citizens of the show. Welcome to
Ave, hail the Kaiser.
welcome to our holiday special. And again, I'm Adam.
Senatus Popularis Quintetus Romanus.
That's Greg. And I'm Techpriest, and I'm the one that's wanted to do this for God knows how long, because it's a good damn book and you should buy it.
Yeah, I've
And you
held
should
off
play
on
it.
it for no reason for 2 years. I don't know why.
3 years. 3 years, I think.
3 years, huh?
I swear to God, it's been about 3 years.
Actually, before we begin, let me see
In
how
all
long.
fairness, Tech, we only started really doing good books in the last 2 years.
That's true.
No,
That is true.
you're both correct and incorrect. 2019.
Yeah, but I said we haven't been really doing good books since 2020.
Yeah, and I've been holding off on this for like what is it, a year and a half, I think. You've not been expecting it because I've kind of made it a meme to never do this book for no reason other than just because it's funny. Requiem for Rome.
It's also because it's a very dense book in many ways, and it's a good book because of it. It's the kind of
Don't
book where it's
ruin
like
the joke.
So originally, I actually had oh god, the expression on this man's face.
Catechus Vampirus.
I was gonna make a joke, but I think this is better than anything I could come up with. Oh man, beautiful expression.
Yeah.
The Deathless City, huh?
Yeah, the Deathless City. Rome is unironically the city that has never truly died. There are periods where it came close. No, it came close to death a few times, but it's always been around. It is called the Eternal City for a reason.
Oh yeah, here we go. Undead City. Ancient Romans were bound by their dead in a web of ancestral rituals that not even they remembered the reason for. They have no taboo against suicide, although almost every culture believes that suicide leads to restless corpses. For the Romans, the dead were always with the living anyway. That's one of the things when you have mortuary cults, which the Romans did. Wasn't as strong as, say, the Egyptians, but they did have them. City of the Dead. That's not a vampire. That's your average Roman. Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I could totally see him in the background of, like, Caligula's court.
We'll get into Caligula and all that. They have some fun ideas about what you can do and play with.
Is that an actor from HBO's Rome?
It might be.
They might have actually taken art from Rome and then just kind of airbrushed it. I wouldn't be surprised.
This is that era of White Wolf where they did that.
Wait, this isn't White Wolf. This is Onyx Path, man.
Nope, this is White Wolf. This is before Onyx Path was created. This is
okay then.
This was released in, I want to say, like 2005 or so.
Yeah, I remember this is the era when they traced Dante from Devil May Cry.
Yeah, 2007 is when this was released. But the introduction to this is absolutely fantastic, in terms of just how it goes and says, yeah, they take lines from Seneca here. Let there be no rivalry let there be rivalry and guilt of every kind. Let their passions know no bounds, no shame. Let blind fury prick on their souls. Heartless be parents' rage, and to children's children let the long trail of sin lead down. For crime's sake exiled, to crime they may return, and may they be as hateful to all men as to themselves. Let there be naught which passion deems unallowed. Let brother fear brother, father fear son, and son father. Let children vilely perish.
I know it's Seneca, but why do they use letter U's? Romans didn't have those.
Translations.
It's a translation.
I know, I'm being an asshole.
To make it, yeah. Let children vilely perish and be yet more vilely born. Let a murderous wife lift hand against her husband. Let wars pass over seas. Let streaming blood drench every land. Again, for a vampire game, that's a fucking good quote.
I sing of battles, blood, and rage.
The grandeur that was Rome was an abattoir erected upon a mass grave. No wonder Rome bred vampires like a corpse breeds flies.
Not too unsurprising. I'd actually argue that if you're talking about a city of dead, though, I think Memphis still beats it.
Memphis would beat it, but Memphis is kind of referenced a little bit. That's probably where the maquette kind of originated around.
Just pointing it out, that one's literally a mortuary city, and honestly more eternal in some ways than Rome.
Yeah. Rome does have its own special bloody flavor to it.
Well, yeah, over 9 centuries, approximately almost 1 million Roman soldiers died to save the and to line senators' pockets. Soldier and civilian, perhaps 300,000 Romans died by political violence under the blades of fellow Romans during the century from the time of Gracchi to the end of the Second Triumvirate. That's not a long period of time, by the way.
That's not.
That's 50
years?
Less
than 100. That's like less than 100 years. Yes.
I think a little over 50.
The Second Triumvirate is Antony, Octavian, and the guy that everyone forgets about because he's completely irrelevant.
And don't forget the fact that Romans died for the city's amusement and enrichment. Over 400 years between Spartacus and Constantine, over 750,000 gladiators died in the arena, not including the 7,000 crucified.
That might be overselling the gladiator.
That might be overall, like across the empire, which I could definitely see.
Across the empire would be plausible.
I definitely believe the 100,000 Christians, though.
Well, yeah,
the Christian persecutions are a little overblown, but
across the empire,
partially
across the empire, sure.
Same with the gladiators.
That's a funny thing. That's a funny thing because when you say Rome, it's sometimes hard to distinguish between what you mean, the city or the empire, because they're both called the same thing.
And this book opens up kind of doing that, kind of not. Like the 300,000 Romans personally, yeah.
Then again, for most of Rome's history, anything that enriched the empire enriched the city. So,
yeah.
I wonder when they're going to get to the part where the Romans collectively had a massive psychotic fit and began electing literal psychopaths every time an emperor was remotely competent.
They kind of get into that.
Quotations. Electing in quotations.
Well, it gets funny because at some points Rome was literally a fucking Thunderdome. The city, not the empire.
Yeah, they'll cover a little bit of that.
So many of the gladiators were foreign, but foreigners hardly had to come to Rome to die for it. The legion slaughtered 80,000 Britons in the wake of Boudicca's revolt. And Caesar, I think that's how you actually are supposed to pronounce it.
Caesar.
No, Caesar, I think. They have killed as many as 100,000 Gauls in his conquests. Plutarch claims 1 million dead at Kaiser's hand. I want to call it Caesar, but that's not how they ever used that C.
Yeah, well, it's how we pronounce it, so fuck them.
Kaiser.
In the 2nd century BC, Marius killed perhaps 250,000 Germans, while in the 3rd century CE, Aurelian sent 400,000 Goths and Persians to their foreign gods. During and after the 3 Jewish revolts.
Deservedly.
Yeah.
Yeah? The 3 Jewish revolts, yeah, they pretty
about
much...
1 million dead, yeah. They basically... The Romans were fucking sick and tired of people calling themselves the Messiah and trying to reunite Judea and throw out whoever the fuck was in charge because they kept fucking doing that. So they basically went, "Yep, okay, you're done. We've played as nice to you. We gave you a bunch of allowances. We gave you a bunch of tax breaks. We gave you a bunch of all this shit, and you didn't fucking get with the program."
Well, it didn't help that they actually had an actual assassin order at the time.
Yes, the Iscariots.
Oh man,
Judas was fucking packing, man. Like that's like the reason why he's called the Iscariot is literally the one holding the dagger.
Yeah, that's the thing about the Jewish revolts. They pretty much did bring it upon themselves repeatedly. No, that's not anti-Semitism. Like, to give you an idea, the Romans were very lax if you were under their reign. The only thing they forced you to acknowledge was, I think, their imperial cult.
You had to make sacrifices for the emperor.
Because of the imperial pax onus.
And
basically, you had to make sacrifices for the emperor. It wasn't necessarily the cult. It's that you had to sacrifice in the name of the gods for the emperor.
And when the Jews refused, that's not the thing that did it. The Romans actually let them get away with that.
The Romans were fine with that as long as they basically, you know, paid taxes and also like at least, you know, send well wishes to the emperor of some kind, please. You know, like
But
just
then they
play
didn't
along.
even do that, and then instead
Yeah.
started silently murdering governors and major staffers in the region.
Like anyone who wasn't Jewish suddenly was getting stabbed in the fucking streets.
Even people who were Jewish.
Or were Jewish who actually did get partially with the program, because there were a lot
They're
of
like,
Hellenized
wow,
Jews.
oh wow, the aqueduct's really good.
Well, not just aqueducts. Like this was something the Jewish people did since the time of the Seleucids.
Yep. A new
There's a reason
collaborator
why-
gets the fucking rope, basically.
There's a reason why the term zealot comes from these people.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why the Romans had to essentially rip them out root and stem and fucking throw them throughout the entire empire.
Which surely had no consequences across history.
Rome makes a desert and calls it peace. That's, I think, a nod to what they did to Carthage.
That was actually a reference to, by Tacticus describing the Britain campaign.
Ah, that would also
It's
count.
also notable that he never said that this was a good thing. He basically condemned it as the worst excess of the violence of imperialism. Yet people use it to support genociding people.
Which is pretty messed up, although didn't Tacitus also think that like the Britons were like weird frog people that were not even worth the attention of the Romans too?
Partly, but he was also like, this is fucking hypocritical.
There's
and we
some there's
have done
some
this.
hilarious quotes where the Romans are basically like the Britons are dirt people. They're the dumbest.
It was yeah. The Julius Caesar comments like, these
Wallowing
are the
in their
most
own
ignorant
filth.
people I've ever like these are the most ignorant people I've ever conquered. Basically, it's like something
They
that is
wallow
attributed to
in
him.
mud and act like toads.
Yeah, Caesar, you conquered them for a fortnight.
Well,
I mean, to be fair, Caesar kind of pops over, goes, "Yo, I'm here," and kind of goes away because his entire thing is in Gaul. Going to Britain was basically him just flexing that I am this awesome.
Well, no. His entire reason was, oh shit, I'm about to be violently murdered for all of the tax debt I owe because I gambled it all or had so many loans.
Okay. So Caesar, basically the entire reason that Caesar invades Gaul is to get slaves to sell for money. I'm pretty much dead serious here. No, that's number one reason.
Also,
number two reason is that politically he was starting to get into a corner where people were catching up with basically there were a lot of people who didn't like his politics, notably regarding land reform. And
which to give you an idea, land reform, for those of you who aren't super familiar with Rome at this point, this is post Gracchi brothers. This is post
Sulla.
Post Sulla. This has gone on for 100 years already.
This is the period where there were violent political assassinations in Rome multiple times and lists of proscripted individuals to die, of which Caesar nearly ended up on the list, by the way. Over the question of your political stance towards tax reform.
He would have had to long story short, he would have had to give up his assignment if he didn't have an actual reason. And his reason, our German our allies under attack. You can't recall me now. I have to save them.
Yeah, I have to save them as he's getting incredibly rich, through loot, slaves, booty, all that, and on top of that is avoiding having to pay a bunch of people back home a bunch of money he owes.
That's the biggest thing. He was in horrible amounts of debt at the time.
He'd went into a lot of debt in order to accrue political capital, because you can say this about Caesar. He knew how to go hard. Like, that is his number one feature. The man never knew how not to go hard when it came to appeasing the populace.
Balls deep.
Balls deep in everything he could find. He was called the bald whoremonger by his troops affectionately.
Reminder, he cut his teeth on intentionally seeking the pirates that captured him as a youth. He made a promise to kill them all horribly.
No, not kill them. Crucify them.
Crucify them. And that's the very first thing he did when he came of age, was to hunt them down and do that.
The funniest thing is that he stuck with them because, I want to note this, he considered the ransom that they were going to pay to him for him insultingly low. So he said, no, I'm worth more than that. Like, come the fuck on, guys. like I can get you more money, and then hung out with them, broed it up, and basically told them all to their faces, I'm gonna fucking kill you all someday. I want you to know that. But I'm enjoying my vacation here because you're not treating me the worst. So, I'll make it awful for you. Don't worry. But in the meantime, enjoy life.
If the Roman Empire itself is nearly vampiric, long-lived, bloodthirsty, insatiable, and prone to frenzy and torpor, so too are the emperors. As the vampires, Roman emperors lived in constant broil of plot and murder against their own children, progenitors, and members of their clan and bloodline. Indeed, Roman history would almost make sense if it were hijacked by a bickering sect of vampires all annoying. Caesar, from his mother's womb untimely ripped, and Cleopatra, infernally so, seductive initiate of the Nile, suggests as much a viewpoint, and the people of Rome perhaps sense it as well. Whenever Tiberius died, Secundus reports that the people of Rome prayed to the Mother Earth in the mains to allow the dead men no abode amongst the damned.
Really?
It's Suetonius, actually, that wrote that. Suetonius, The Lives of the Caesars. This is one of my favorite quotes in the book. Is so much for Caligula's emperor. We must not tell of his career as a monster. His body was conveyed secretly to the gardens of Lamia, where it was partially consumed on a hastily erected pyre and buried beneath a light covering of turf. Later, his sisters, on return from exile, dug it up, cremated it, and consigned it to the tomb. Before this was done, it is well known that the caretakers of the gardens were disturbed by shades, and that in the house where he was laid, not one night passed without some terrible apparition.
If Rome was diabolized under the Republic before the Caesars, it was a smaller scale. The reign of terror of Sulla killed 4,700, barely a patch on Tiberius's 30,000 political murders. Tiberius's degenerate megalomaniacal heir Caligula only managed 350,000 executions before his assassination. But as he reminds us, Caligula didn't lie easy after death.
Well, also, the reason he was assassinated so early was intentionally because he kept fucking with the Senate.
He kept fucking with everyone. Like, not just the Senate, with everyone.
Domitian killed 20,000. He also liked to torture flies in his spare time.
Domitian is a fun emperor.
Yeah.
Even a good emperor like Claudius executed 3,000 people for treason.
Yeah, Caracalla killed about 30,000 supporters of his rival Geta in a single purge. And it's important to note that these were often very personal deaths. These were ones where the emperor sometimes would be the one doing the killing, and oftentimes the people that were killed were named. They were put on lists known as prescription lists, and if you killed them,
Commodus boasted to killing 12,000 people in the arena, not counting his political purges.
Yeah.
Of course, it's Commodus, so he's fucking lying about that. But
or he doesn't talk about the fact that they had their hands amputated before they entered the arena.
Yeah.
Or no, he just, as soon as they stepped foot in the arena, he just stabbed them.
And of course, then there's the other fun bits of Roman absolute power, such as Tiberius's midget sex parties.
Yeah.
And
Elagabalus, of course.
Elagabalus, who is most of what we know about him is a political hit job, basically. But
he was still a horrible fuck up.
He was still a fuck up of an emperor. A lot of the stuff that's said about him dressing up as the woman and all that sort of stuff is almost certainly propaganda against him. All he did was, in the Eastern fashion, wore eyeliner. And then
if you're looking for a goth before goths, though, look no further than Domitian's banquets at the affairs. Everything, the drapery, statuary, couches, and everything was black. Guests arrived to find their names carved in broken pillars or tombstones. And Domitian would discuss their chosen how they would like to die over wine and caramelized hummingbirds.
He also covered his
Tim Burton if he was running a country.
Yeah, he also covered the pillars of his palace with highly polished moonstone.
Yeah, Tiberius's grotto was real. He was that much of a fucking wild asshole.
Tiberius is a fucking nutcase, yeah.
Yeah, it's insane.
The top, of course, though, is Nero's famous feast of in CE 64. This is probably exaggerated, but basically, supposedly, he lit the feast with a bunch of crucified bodies of mostly Christians.
That one's pretty good, but my favorite is, I forget the name of the fat bastard. He was one of the Year of the Five Emperors, if I recall. I forget which one he was. But I think, what was it? His feast cost what was it? Most of the salary of an entire earnings quarter of Rome itself, because he had dozens of roasted fucking swans and peacocks and a bunch of other insane things.
Yeah.
I know there was a Roman emperor who, within this, like, he only ruled for like 5 months, but I think he spent something like 10% of Rome's GDP on just eating like a big fat fuck with the most
He was a big fat fuck.
Yeah, it was one of the 5 emperors.
It was also because he knew that one of the other emperors was coming there to kill him, so he was like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna."
Anyway, then they give a description of the play Octavia, credited to Seneca, although it refers to events after his death.
Yeah.
If Octavia is not from Seneca, the play is nevertheless a fully Senecan tragedy.
Oh, by the way, here's another example of Nero being amazing in the best way possible. He killed 22,000 people personally, including his own mother, his stepbrother, and both of his wives. The second he did by kicking to death.
In all fairness to that mother thing, there were at least 3 confirmed attempts from his mother to kill him.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Although his second wife he kicked to death while she was pregnant.
Yes, that is true.
And killing Seneca.
Also, I want to note, a lot of what we know about Nero is probably also propaganda. He made some real fucking enemies in his time.
Well, it's also because he was a genuine fuck up to the.
Oh yeah, he was.
Well, from what I understand, he wasn't. He didn't even want to be emperor.
No. You're forgetting the worst crime he violated. He liked taking it up the ass.
I mean, there's that, but I think it was also he didn't even want to be emperor. He wanted to be some fucking
an artist.
Yeah.
I know, but that was his real greatest crime in the Romans' eyes. He liked being the one to take it up the ass.
The greatest example of bullshit propaganda around Nero. I even used it as the thumbnail to a degree as a soy jack. He did not play while Rome burned.
He wasn't even in Rome.
He actually opened his estates up for people after the fire to live on. He also then built a giant bathhouse in some of the area, but that's just what people did.
He did have Christians murdered and then have their skulls carved into like lamps, though. He probably did that, though.
I mean, everyone was blaming the Christians for everything, because to be fair, a lot of the sort of fires and shit that would happen in some of these cities would be set by Christians in order to get themselves killed as martyrs. I'm serious.
Yeah.
This was a big problem with early Christianity, to the point where the church fathers basically had to make a rule that if you did this, you're not actually going to heaven.
That's not martyrdom.
It's not martyrdom. It's just suicide with extra steps.
Also, massacre. This is why Catholicism bans suicide. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah.
And also, since you mentioned Nero's gay bathhouse, reminder that the insane bastard known as Caracalla tried to outdo it by making his own.
Yes, he did.
I know. I'm just saying that was probably the greatest crimes in the eyes of the Roman men.
Was taking it up the ass, probably. Yeah.
Also, killing Seneca by killing him in a gay bathhouse. Don't forget about that part.
Yeah. Of course, one of the fun bits about this is that they imply.
Sorry, I was gonna try to continue on a little bit.
Yeah. You can go.
Told that Seneca intended his plays not for the public stage, but for private readings after banquets in which a few friends would take the parts and follow the tragedy in its terrifying cathartic conclusion. In short, Seneca might have actually written Vampire the Requiem. Who knows?
Which I kind of like. No, they imply that if you wanted to, you could easily have Seneca be someone here because of how he died and how it's written about, and also that some of the things about him, that his blood flowed slowly from him, much like a vampire's would.
I'm not going to say anything about that because fair enough, I guess.
Seneca's chronicles are not subtle or realistic, but wild, dark, and terrible. Someone would call them operatic. Blah 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 blah. It's just they're just talking about storytelling.
Yeah.
They
also talk about the first well-known reign of blood in Rome took place under the reign of Romulus in 737 BC. There's a lot of other stuff like this. There's a reign of blood in 881. Sorry, in 181.
Each of Rome's 7 hills has its own genius locus, its own lord of the lands. 7 hills, 7 vast, semi-torpid monsters, and 7 barrows ancient. Suetonius has already mentioned the Gardens of the Lamia, blah, blah, blah. One of the negatives I will say is they have a bad habit of using parentheses here quite a bit.
I'm going off on the tangents. I'm going off on
Very,
that.
very movie Bob-esque, and that's not a good thing. Thirst of
Because they want to in asides, and it's just hard to do that.
I don't know where the Reign of Blood of Romulus came from, but I know that
that's on the
Julii,
previous page.
Well, I know that the Julii come from Remus.
Yes, they do. Well, they actually come from Venus, not Remus.
No, I thought they claimed Remus. I looked into them right before we started.
If they do claim Remus, that's very interesting.
Yeah, like the idea
very,
is that...
very interesting for this setting.
Yeah, like the idea is that when Romulus killed him, he was awakened again as a vampire. I think that's the route they went with.
Oh, that's this one. Yes, that's what you're talking about. Okay, I think you're talking about the Julius family.
No, that's what I'm saying. The Julii,
and not the clan. The family historically.
No, not the family historically. No, never.
In the clan in this, yeah, they claim Remus as their first.
Yeah, I don't know what you're thinking there. I mean,
sorry,
it may be Chronicle's fault for. No, it's probably Chronicle's fault for naming their vampire clan after the probably most fucking famous of the Roman gens out there, up there with Brutus.
Yeah. The introduction
and I don't
to
mean
this...
the guy who just stabbed Julius Caesar. Remember, their most noteworthy founding ancestor is the dude who fucking kicked out the kings of the fucking Tarquinian king.
Yeah.
Like it's not their fault for having that name. It's their fault for picking that name.
Yeah, they then go into like but yeah, the introduction of this is fantastic, and this is what kind of sold me on the book, because it goes into like, okay.
Yeah, like there's 7 horrifying monsters. On top of that, they got more from Syria.
Yes.
Like the Syrian cult at the Grotto of Farina.
Yep.
By the way, this is partially why Elagabalus got his body destroyed, besides possibly being a bit of a weird eyeliner wearing guy who liked it up the butt. He took his name from the Syrian solar deity, which...
Yes.
Well, having solar...
Because his mother was a priestess of her. That's the reason why he took it.
And that's probably why they made him a tranny in future things.
In propaganda, yeah.
Because the Syrian solar deity that they worshipped and that he was named after was a woman.
Yeah.
Which was different from Helios/Sol Invictus. Now, the guy was a nut job and also probably did swing both ways, so let's keep that in mind.
But to be fair, most Roman noblemen often would swing both ways.
It's just he was the taker, he was the taker. That was
the rumor is he was the taker. Again, there's so much we don't know, and we can't know because this guy was obviously hated by a lot of people that were writing the histories, much like Nero.
Although it's not although given that Rome itself is a cesspit, there's a reason that near the end of the Roman Empire they moved to Ravenna.
Yeah.
Emperor Nicocado.
I could totally see that.
Yeah. Anyway, so as they go through, they talk about the some of these other various deities that come in. For example, you have the Lemuras, the restless dead. The
Augustus' first obelisk was made of blood-colored crystalline porphyry. Porphyry means purple, you fucking moron. Don't use words unless you know exactly what it means.
But the main thing is that the Romans took in all the other gods, where they're talking about like Dionysus with the fun epithets of eater of raw flesh, god of the night, and manslayer, god of frenzy, possession, and drama. The Dacians called him Zamalaxus, and knew he lived among the dead. They impaled a human sacrifice every 5 years to carry him messages.
Kinda yeah, kinda no. So, okay, here's the thing. Dionysus, Zalmoxis, and Bacchus, which is what the Romans knew them by. 3 variations on the same god. That, due to the Romans conquering all that shit, eventually kind of got blurred together. See, the Romans' beliefs kind of evolved over time to become a little bit closer to the Greeks, but still not perfect. One of the best examples in my experience is their take on Saturn, who they compared to Kronos, the father of the leader of the Titans and
Yeah.
the guy who ate his own children. See, originally Saturn was more of a harvest deity.
Same with Mars.
Yeah, I mean Mars was more bloody harvest, but yeah. Saturn was primarily a harvest good times deity. That then became darker because they conflated him more and more with Kronos. And the same here, Bacchus might have been the same level of insane as Dionysus. We don't fully know. Might have been perfectly adopted.
Bacchus was much more the party guy, as Dionysus evolved over time from I am also a death god and a god of death and rebirth because of the process of winemaking involves crushing grapes and also hallucinations because you get fucking drunk. Like Dionysus as a god is a one with a much darker history than generally you think about. Because remember, this is the guy that turned people into dolphins and ripped up his followers ripped apart people in ecstasy.
Yeah, they were essentially a psychotic drug cult of death dealers.
Yes.
According to Herodotus, Zalmoxis taught that neither nor his guests or any of their descendants should ever die. By the way, fun fact about Zalmoxis. From what I remember, the Dacian tribes that worshipped him tended to only worship him. They were not quite monotheistic, but there were elements of it with them, from what I remember. At least the ones that seriously, focus on him, because I think they also still worshipped ancestors quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's really weird.
Yeah. Again, the fact of the matter is that Roman syncretism means that they would draw analogies between their gods and other gods all the time.
Oh yeah,
which is why they believe
like
that Odin was
different
Hermes.
faces.
Yeah. Then there's like Hermes Trismegistus, which is their weird fusion of Hermes and Thoth.
My favorite is, I think there's like 5 different takes on Zeus. There's Zeus Jupiter. There's Zeus based on, I forget there's the 2 different strains of Zeus because Greece actually had 2 strains of him. One for the more northern Greeks and one for the more southern, if I recall correctly.
The Dacians and the Ionians.
I forget what their terms were because they were like fused with like part of another like holy site or something. At least when you gave him his titles. I know there's a god that he was paired with in the east that the Bactrians usually had, and I think they might have paired him with an Egyptian god at one point. It's really nuts, and then sometimes they'll just take straight up gods from other religions and just add them in, like Isis and Helios.
Coyote 16 asks, wasn't this all before the word blue was invented?
Kinda. I mean, the word blue was a thing. It's just that the use of it was weird.
Also, periphery still refers to purple. Specifically purple. To give you an idea, there's a reason why in Byzantine inheritance, which hey, it's slightly Rome-related, Eastern Empire, the term perithero gentes means born in the purple. And in terms of inheritance, it's because you were born to the emperor, which puts you above even your older brother.
It specifically means being born in the imperial palace.
Yeah, because you're born in the palace. You're literally born to the emperor, so you have a slightly better claim. I'm dying, Egypt, dying.
Of course, they're hardly the only ones. We of course have Isis, and then there's good old Sibylline.
Ah, yes, the Sibylline worship.
Attack you've gone age restricted.
The Sibylline priests are a fun topic when you consider that it's basically a cult of Ishtar that is slightly different.
They castrate themselves.
Yes, they do.
And to give you an idea, their order and routines were so weird that H.P. Lovecraft, on occasion, would reference them.
Yeah, the Sibyllines
Rats in the Walls, for example. The Roman cult got fused with whatever weird nightmare that the building was on.
Yeah. The Sibyllines were also notorious for technically being one of the few faiths that the Romans banned. Mostly because they would do public self-castration.
Yeah, that kind of... I don't blame him for banning that.
Because here's the thing, they're usually totally fine with whatever the fuck you're doing. But going...
They let the fucking Bacchanites exist. They only
Yeah.
punished them when they went full drunken insane mode and killed people.
Yeah.
Well, the question is, do you think these Ishtarans? Why do you think these Ishtarans?
You're a little quiet there, Greg.
Why do you think the Ishtarans cut their cock off?
Because they watched a movie that also was called Ishtar, and they regretted it ever since. These men are pawns.
No, in this case, the fun bit too is also that people don't like to talk about this, but the Romans would also do human sacrifice. This was
Saturn in particular.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that human sacrifice in Rome was technically illegal. This didn't stop it from happening in extremis.
Well, to give you an idea, Saturnalia, which is actually the holiday we're half-assedly kind of celebrating as a joke, the very earliest iterations, way back in the early Republic period, it opened up with human sacrifice.
Oftentimes, it's a captured enemy. You slit their throat as an offering to Saturn.
Yep. They only stopped when they began using that as the brush to tar Carthage with.
Yeah.
And that's only because it made them look hypocritical.
Can't talk about how those Phoenicians are caving in the skulls of babies when you slit the throats of men.
Not only that, but they'd also, the Vestal Virgins. They'd sometimes, kill them. Usually when they're corrupted, air quotes. The other things that they'd sometimes do is every May 14th, a procession of priests and Vestals would throw 27 human effigies into the river. This is most likely a reference to a previous practice where they would do similar sacrifices.
But you see, we don't sacrifice anymore, unlike those filthy Carthaginians. Ignore that Saturnalia started with a blood sacrifice.
Please.
Anyway, should we continue on?
Yes. Then, of course, there was child sacrifices before. There's also the matter that Cicero accused one of his political rivals of practicing human sacrifice for the use of necromancy and divination, feeding the blood of the youths to a wise shade to learn different things. Domitian accused one of his own rivals of human sacrifice to assist the future emperor Nerva. Of course, there's a few other kind of similar sacrifices.
Here's another example of Elagabalus. Elagabalus also offered his own foreskin, or perhaps more of himself, to his own god, Elagabal.
Yeah. Under Julian the Apostate, sacrifice of pure children was apparently epidemic.
Now this one, I'm gonna argue, is kind of bullshit Christian revisionism, because Julian the Apostate, well, yeah, he's the last pagan Western emperor, and he tried to fight fucking hard against what a couple predecessors had.
Yeah, had done that basically neutered a lot of what
that one I'm gonna call bullshit on.
Almost certainly.
Mostly.
The Emperor Trajan's lover was eaten by crocodiles in the Nile.
I mean, that happens all the time.
90 years later, Elgavaldus rededicated the statue to his goddess's castrated lover. The Greeks also would call this blood-sating was common in Roman necromancy, where basically what you'd do is you'd cut yourself or you'd cut someone else, and you'd let the blood flow into the ground in order to feed the spirits. And of course, there's a whole etiquette to it. If you sacrifice them with their face towards the sky, in other words, if you're cutting the throat while they're lying on their back, that's a sacrifice to the gods. If you're cutting them with their throat facing the ground, that's a sacrifice to the dead.
Oh yeah, it's right here. The whole etiquette's right here. And it's called the Jugulatus, by the way.
Yes. It's also important to note that the Lares, which are the wandering dead, were the ones that would usually get these blood sacrifices. Pentates, or household gods, generally weren't too happy about that sort of thing. The Jupiter's priest couldn't really have raw meat because blood was not what he wanted. The other thing to note is that the terminal stones would often also end up getting blood sacrifice on them around the time. There's kind of also an interesting bit of what they would do at night, because it's important to note that a lot of the assassinations in Rome obviously took place either during the night because it's just easier to move around, and they always had that ancestor cult mentality. That's something to know about the Romans up until basically the end, was the concept that you are continuing a legacy that has lasted for how many years. The dead are watching you and they are judging you. It's important to note that this is the reason why Caesar cries when he looks upon a statue of Alexander, right? It's not because Alexander is amazing or anything like that. It's that Caesar looks at this statue and goes, I haven't done enough, right? I haven't done enough to be worthy to join someone like that. They're judging me. And that's where the forward ends. And I think it's a good place to end it there in terms of this is the attitude they want you to take into this game, which is that the Romans are
a lot more hardcore than you ever would have thought.
They're incredibly hardcore. The Rome itself is paved and built in blood, and that the idea of being an immortal blood-sucking monster fits the idea of Rome itself to a T, because that's sort of what it did.
You also fit in the mythology to the point where it's very plausible, at least as a vampire, to just pretend to be not the household spirit, but the other guys.
The Lares, the hungry dead.
Like, you have your excuse right there.
This is one of the reasons why I also say that another good splat to run in Rome, especially if you're doing Republican Rome, like around the time of Sulla, would be Sin Eaters. Yeah, because there's a lot of hungry dead and a lot of Italian folk traditions around that time that basically would have being a Sin Eater would be very important. Because of the communion with the dead, because there'd be holidays where they would leave out food and festivals and doorways, for the Lares, for the hungry spirits.
Also would be amazing for vampires because that's a lot of bloodshed over land rights.
Yes.
So this was just the foreword. Keep that in mind.
That's the foreword. That's not even the prologue. The prologue's a fun bit of introductory fiction where it's going like this is the testimony of a vampire that was made at this time that is now going into present day. And this is his memory of what happened before, tainted by the ages, admittedly, about his life during this end of Rome. And it's interesting. I'm going to let anyone else read it before, because it's not really relevant to the rest of the story. Or kind of the rest of the book, but it's still very good, and it has some very good imagery as well.
Yeah, there was I showed it. There was a really cool. Let me show it again, because it is genuinely a good bit of art. Right here.
Yeah, the man with the two women, the burning cross in the background. And I like the last bit of this bit though is this summum immanuria. Is that what you wish to do to me, my children, isn't it? Destroy me utterly? You'll read this over my greasy ash, pondering over my words. You didn't even know I was this old, did you? Ancient Rome, you'll say, and scoff. Impossible. Maybe it is. Maybe in poring through old records, you'll find that I was lost in the midst of my own memory, inventing things whole cloth, pulling them out of history books or old poems or even my own addled imagination. But I remember it. I remember the things that Decimus did to me and how I destroyed him. And I remember those terrible things I did to you and how you will destroy me. It all comes again, the rot of the world, the sickness, the cycle, the whole violent affair, coming again and again and again to haunt us. The dance of the gods comes again, doesn't it? Hide in your chapels, childer. Hide in the shadow of the cross and the spear. Morning comes soon, which means you have decided to forestall my destruction another night. So be it. Tomorrow night I shall write more. And the night after, if you allow me the luxury of more time. It is nice to think of myself as something less than a mortal, something common, a man, just a man waiting out his final nights. Remember this, if an empire as great as Rome can crumble to dust, then nothing is eternal, not even us.
Very fitting.
Yeah. Again, the fiction is very well written in this book. I'm not going to read it all out, but I wanted to single out that paragraph because it's that introductory little bit of fiction, and I think it captures another thing about this as well. This is not Rome at its height that this book is covering. This is Rome as it's dying.
Yeah, this is the Rome where if you show competence, you're legitimately killed as a threat.
Yeah.
Like,
This
I'm
is
not
the
even kidding. So many times there were people that could actually remotely do shit to reverse the decline. Very first thing they do is get killed by rivals. Or
yes.
killed by the actual people, because how dare you expect us to not blow all of our load on our whatever nonsense we're doing.
It's also important because this is the other bit of the introduction is that they say that there's a tendency to see civilizations in terms of present circumstances and morality. What is now seems to have been as it always has been. That's just how it is for modern people, right?
Which, in a way, I kind of like this because it's almost a refutation of current writing for tabletop games.
Yeah, this is about a decade ago though, almost 2 decades ago, where they're talking about this as a historical setting, where they're talking about, and they do this with the Dark Eras books. They basically say like, yeah, no, things are different back in here. Here's what people thought, and here's what people did. And
But you
that's one
don't
of the things
understand. You can't write that with that lens. You have to write it with current year lens.
they only did that for one setting in Dark Eras, and that's like Reconstruction, I think. And even then, it's not really that much of a lens.
I'm just finding it interesting that this is what they're writing here.
Yeah, this is a thoroughly modern conceit. The truth is that civilizations come and go wholesale, and those that fall are replaced, not renewed. The world that is marks a society with inheritance from the world that was. Everything is burned, everything is rebuilt, and our society is one reimagined from the wreckage of the ones that came before.
And it still applies to vampires, by the way. They just have a longer time frame.
Yes, Requiem for Rome prevents the opportunity to play Vampire the Requiem in a vastly different world, which is true. It's very different because, for one thing, they go and talk about in the core vampire book is the concept of Camarilla that was around during Rome and then failed. It failed. The first true vampiric government that spanned multiple cities and almost an entire continent and really the entire Mediterranean world, and it failed.
Well, it's also kind of because this is the new era, this is the new Chronicles. This is
Yes.
also a refutation of the world in a way. World of Darkness.
It is not necessarily a refutation. It's a
It's a
the
twist.
Camarilla was always a reference, and it was always a twist. But I think that's the key.
That's what I meant, a
thing.
twist.
And in many
this
ways,
case, yeah, it's the first time vampires got together like this, and ultimately they get wrecked.
they fail. They fail because of their own sins and their own problems and their own weight of centuries and poor decisions and all these other things.
Also, Satan owls.
Also, Satan owls, yes. But this is one of the reasons why I really like this whole thing is that they talk about that clans themselves are not immortal. The idea because when we talk about for example Masquerade, there's 13 clans, there's all this other stuff, there's all this going on. When we talk about, how would I put it? When we talk about Requiem has a very different concept, which is that vampires when we talk about the kindred aren't just like, there is no single origin. There has never been a single origin. These are all corpses that are walking around and drinking blood and very similar, that have fed upon each other and eaten each other and basically merged together in a symbiotic evolution to become what is the modern kindred. Like, because I watched our old one on the blood. What was it? Night Horrors before, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we just lost Greg. Uh,
That's fine. It happens.
Where where they were talking about like the Fomori, and it's like the Fomori use the same rules that vampire do. It's just that they deal with a lot more fat than they do with blood. and other things like that, where they talk about that, like the concept of the blood of the kindred hasn't always been there, right? Like the clans have different origins, and that's very obvious. It's just they're very similar in that they're all basically occupying the same sort of thing, and they behave in a similar way.
Like, for example, the Deva hail from the Near East, mainly around your Persia, northern India region.
Yeah,
The
they
Maquette,
hail.
clearly from Memphis.
Yep, they even reference that in this book.
Although, there is a fun little hypothesis I remember looking up where the Ventru and Gangrel come from the same source, possibly the
Very
Julii.
possible. Well, the Julia, they'll go in and they'll talk about this. So they go with the clans where they talk about the 4 of the 5 modern clans exist in the setting, and one, the Ventru, is replaced with a uniquely Roman line called the Julii, a line that may or may not be the predecessor to the Ventru.
They might not be. They just have dominate.
They have very similar disciplines. In this first edition of Requiem for Rome, they eventually go back to the Julii and they change their physicals a bit. But in the first one, they have the same set of powers as Ventru, which is dominate, animalism, and resilience. In the update that was done for second edition, they changed it slightly to more reflect Rome itself, which is that they added, which is dominate, vigor, and resilience. Which to me makes some sense, because Rome was not afraid to bust heads open. It's the vitality of an empire. It's the danger of that and the strength, which fits.
Also, it's making them actually kind of different, other than just
yes,
file the name off.
File the numbers off, change the weakness, call it good.
But yeah, I remember reading the hypothesis that the Julii, some of them would split and form the Gangrel because of the whole wolf, animal cult, wolf cult thing.
Yeah,
because there was a genuine wolf cult.
Yes, but that doesn't make sense when you consider that the Gangrel have been around in Scandinavia for a very long time.
Which is why it probably is just to represent the Draugr, the restless Norse dead.
Yeah, well, so the Maquette, actually, to some degree. Like, that's what's weird about, like, that, is that you can say that this is the clan, oh, this is Maquette, because they have the same weaknesses. They might not necessarily have the same origin. They're the same blood, sort of, yeah, but they're not necessarily the same. And that's one of the things I like about that, because, like, the Maquette that were up in Norway are not like any other Maquette ever. And they have a very weird power set. Where they don't have fangs. They have to feed through jabbing bone shards into people and sucking their blood out through their fingers.
My question is, why the fuck are they called Maquette then?
Well, they're Maquette as in they're part of the clan. They've got the similar weakness of sunlight. It's just that, yeah, they're a bit different. The Norvegi is what they're called. They're a fun bloodline from the Maquette handbook. To give you an idea of, like, this is how varied a clan can actually be.
I feel like it makes no sense if they're all the way up in fucking Norway.
Yeah,
like,
it doesn't really.
They shouldn't be called after some fucking Egyptian mortuary cult group.
They're known as the again, they're known as the Norvegi. They're not known as the Maquette until way later, when the rest of the kindred world finds out about them, where they're like, oh, they're obviously Maquette because they have the same sort of blood weakness, which is that they don't like sunlight. But they don't have fangs either.
No vampire likes fucking sunlight, dude.
Yeah, but even more so than usual. Like, they're extremely weak to fire and direct sunlight, like even more than a normal vampire would be. And then they have the other weird Maquette quirks where they're like, oh, church bells and weird things like that. So they're similar, but they're different, right? They're close enough that you can call them Maquette, because they are, for all intents and purposes, Maquette.
They're just different. Have many conflictions about that.
But that's kind of what I'm getting at. The blood changes, the blood is mutable, and the blood is, will have different things. One of the other theories about the Ventru is that the Ventru actually were around in Rome, and they were around at the same time as the Julii. It's just that they're the ones from Troy. They're the Aeneid. They came with Aeneas. They came with all that, and then the Julii kind of shoved them out of the way. They're the Lares. They're the spirits of the family, basically.
So the theme
Anyway,
and mood of Requiem of Rome is disintegration. Like, along with all kindred, the vampires of Rome struggle to maintain their humanity. Unlike their modern counterparts, though, most kindred in the setting do not abide by an ideology that acknowledges sin or redemption. So they believe the progression of internal rot is inevitable and purposeless. And
basically,
this
you're
is
gonna.
represented by Rome itself. Okay, so basically, they went really hard on the fucking Fisher King logic.
It's more that if you are a vampire in this era, right? This is before the Lancia Sanctum exists. Well, it does exist this time, but it's not one of the primary powers because the Camarilla is suppressing that shit for very good reasons. The the nature that you've seen is that Rome is starting to collapse, right? Everything around it, like the fact of the matter is that even these immortal beings cannot maintain something forever. It's just not working. The fact of the matter is that there are no covenants right now. Like, we'll get kind of into these other bits, but they go into the myths and the reality. Rome is not what a modern vampire thinks it was, no matter how well informed or clear headed one might be. For example, the Camarilla at its peak was the most successful vampire society in history, and that is the truth. It was. It branched out all across the Mediterranean. It controlled the Roman knights itself. It had a defined set of laws and ethics and codes and all these other things, and it worked.
It's to the point where even currently, some of the basic ideas that they have are still used by vampires to denote their own covenants.
Yes.
Like they
Like
still
for
use a couple of it.
one of the big ones is that the Invictus, as a covenant, directly trace their line to the Camarilla. That's their claim to legitimacy, is that we were in the Camarilla. We are the Camarilla. And that's not
Didn't
completely
they
wrong.
also do things like the introduction thing? Like, isn't that also from Camarilla too? Where
Yeah,
you have to
like
present yourself.
like a lot of the stuff that they talk about is
The
all this.
concept of an Elysium.
Yes, like Elysium itself is a concept that comes from the Camarilla. It's the Camarilla basically tackles the idea of how do we have a society where we can have new vampires come into the city and not have us tear them apart,
Also,
right?
the Invictus being both the tradition of being the Camarilla successors. Myth and fact, they take a lot from it, but it's through the lens of Dark Age feudalism, which is when the Invictus was formed.
Yeah, the Invictus is formed after the Camarilla falls. It's basically the survivors piggybacking off of what was happening in Europe at the time in terms of politics, which is this devolution of feudalism. Because when Rome collapses, a lot of these big population centers collapses, which means vampires have to shift out and move around or die.
Yeah, so a lot of the infrastructure just eats shit. The fuck it YOLO generation of vampires, kinda. It's more along the lines of they don't have that redemption and point of purpose because because the people they're coming from always believe the dead's fucking watching them. So their actions are being recorded for centuries upon centuries, and because of the ties of death that just the entire ancient world had. Every ancient world civilization in the West had a mortuary cult or a thing to deal with death. Memento mori, the knowledge that you will die one day.
Yeah,
And because of that, because that's literally that's one of the biggest ethos in Rome. Memento mori, you will one day die. You must acknowledge that. Vampires know that one day, no matter how good they are at avoiding it,
they're probably going to die.
they're going to
And
meet
if they
second
aren't,
death.
and if they don't, they're out of the cycle, right? And that's the other big thing about a lot of these ancient religions is that it's very secular. You are expected that you will die someday. That is natural. You have broken the cycle that your ancestors, your gods, and the world itself has placed upon you. What can you call yourself other than cursed?
And then there's the whole fact of the matter that this is around the time because Rome was around. It's the Eternal City, as mentioned. Rome has been around long enough that the vampires that join the Seven Hills, they make sure to not wake them up anymore because they're not remotely human anymore. They're gibbering monsters.
They're low humanity, at the very least.
Best.
At best. And they're ancient.
And they don't remember shit.
Yeah. Even by the standards of like vampires, these guys are old. They're at least 1,000 years old at this point.
And reminder, you as a vampire, yeah, you've been around like probably a few decades. You're looking at what's going to be your future.
Mm-hmm.
At best,
and your future is to become something that eats its own kind.
And on top of that, doesn't even have a sense of what is right and wrong anymore. Or
it exists to feed.
So at best, you're gonna drop dead and become ash. At worst,
that's your hope.
You become a hungry ghost.
Yeah, your hope is, and this is part of what the Lancia preys on at this time period, is it offers a lot of these younger vampires who've grown up with the idea of Christianity this escape route from basically being taken out of the cycle of life and death. It says, no, we have a place for you. And that's terrifying the shit out of mortals. And you can see why the Camarilla doesn't like this.
Yep, because the Lancia Sanctum during its early years struggled to be recognized by Roman kindred. Many of the scattered faiths of the sanctified were literally illegal. In fact,
their blood magic was banned. Yeah. Because they had their own blood magic. They had their own authorized users of blood magic. You can't get in on that game.
The Circle of the Crone existed in Rome? Kind of yes, kind of no. Circle of the Crone is essentially it's formed by essentially pagan vampires over the years into a society.
Well, there's two bits of that. There's the pagan elements of it, and then there's just the weird quasi blood religion aspects of it. There's other bits of the Crone that, for example, go off of the Mary Magdalene cults and like the Mary cults, where they're a lot like the Lancia Sanctum, but they're not doctrinally part of it, I guess would be the way to put it. There's other bits of the circle that are literally like, we just don't think we just have this blood magic. That's what makes us, different than you. Go fuck yourselves. We're part of the circle by choice, and because if we weren't, they'd kill us.
Yep, and in this case, kind of, yeah. Essentially, the cult of augurs, the vampires there, form one of the greens that eventually form the Circle of the Crone. There will be survivors of vampires that essentially become part of the circle, but officially no, they're not around.
They're not around. The cult of the augurs is the one that would lead definitely to the modern Crone's ritual aspects, but how they view blood magic is very different than how a lot of the modern Crone views blood magic.
Yeah, do modern Crones just rip apart the birds to look at their still pulsing innards?
Not really.
That's literally how the Romans did things. They would take
for them it's much more. Yeah. For them it's much more communion with the divine. For the Circle of Augurs, it's literally, this is just what we do.
This is what we do. Like you take a chicken, you fucking cut its guts open, look at it. Ah, yes.
Yeah.
We have divined what that tomorrow will be a snow day.
It's a much more rationalized version of it, which is how the Romans handled a lot of their magic. It was very practical.
Yep. They had their own they had a variety of mancies, and the most common one is it's not only just studying the organs of birds. They actually would do things like study the flight of birds to denote whether or not they were destined to win that day.
Yeah.
Not even kidding. Ornithomancy is what it's called. And that's why Roman legions actually, I think, had chickens or something. I think it was roosters.
Yeah, they'd have the Romans were very smart in that they figured that if you got a prophecy or you need a good omen, you can force it to happen. So they do things like carry birds with them so that they could release those birds, and therefore they've got the correct number of birds in the sky to bring the to bring things into line for an auspicious victory.
Yep, to load the dice.
Yeah, they'd cheat, and this was a very time-honored Roman practice. For example, Caesar himself was not a very faithful individual, but he was considered one of the best heads of the faith ever because he did all the rituals exactly. He never professed like an extreme devotion to the gods. He just did everything properly.
Hi, am I on the internet?
Yes, you
Hey,
are, Biggie.
Biggs, we're
Welcome.
looking at Requiem for Rome.
Ooh. Okay, so was this before, like, wasn't Rome when, like, the oh fuck, what are the magic ones again? The no.
Oh no, this is Chronicles, so that's like the 5 vampire
Okay.
type. Okay, so here we haven't gotten far because this is a super dense book, and you're vampires dealing with the late stage of Rome. Like we're talking the period where we had guys who literally murdered philosophers in gay bathhouses, guys who dress up as Syrian goddesses with eyeliner and getting murdered by their own Praetorian guard. A fat fuck who single-handedly blew the entire treasury of the city on the most retarded amount of food ever. Guys who would run midget sex parties. Guys who would paint everything black and describe your death to you as you're fucking dining on Hummingbird. We're talking the absolute nadir of Rome.
We also want to get into the fact that the last bit of this is the Ventrue are clearly the direct descendants of the Julii, and they go flat out, no, they are not. They have a lot of common, but any modern vampire who claims direct lineage is either lying or misinformed.
Mainly because if you want to know what happened to the Julii, it involves Satan elves.
Now that being said, there is a bloodline of the Ventrue that does share the name and physical stuff of a person that is in this book, which is the Corbulus or whatever, the Macarius, who probably are, at least in part, descended from the Julii, though if that's through diablerie or not is anyone's guess.
So anyway, how to use this book? There's a lot of chapters, and you can just kind of use them as you need. Chapter 1 just kind of deals with the legendary history of ancient Rome. And chapter 2 includes the clans of Rome, the Camarilla and its factions. Because, guess what, Biggs? Camarilla did exist in Chronicles. They just got murdered by Satan elves and Rome eating shit and dying.
Wow. That's extreme.
Yeah. It hits the hell. So basically, they split it through. Chapter 1 runs through the legendary history of Rome.
Yep.
Including the stuff about vampires. Chapter 2 gives you an entire thing of how do you run this setting, like how do you build in it, and then chapter 3 gives you a whole list of things about a debate system you can use in game to represent the forum.
The Romans were in love with rhetoric to the point where
oh boy,
you could make a career out of just being that asshole who argues.
Literally, the Romans, much like Americans or their spiritual successors, were incredibly fond of suing each other. This meant that being a lawyer was a very, very, very important profession, and very much something that people like, say, Cicero, would make their money and reputations off of, would be to go out and rhetorically defend the citizens in various slights, oftentimes for money or for favors.
You can literally make your entire career trying to prove people that they're legally retarded.
Yes,
as a lawyer,
your entire thing as a lawyer, and some were very successful at it, was basically to say, no, the law's retarded, ignore it.
So yeah, that's kind of the big thing. So sources and inspirations, here's all of them. Julius Caesar, a lot of Shakespeare, obviously.
Shakespeare, of course, because I, Claudius is a very good show. I'd recommend actually watching that. Spartacus.
Gladiator. Oh, that's a classic.
Gladiator's a classic, and I love that they had to tone down Gladiator. Because there's a scene in Gladiator that they had to cut where they go to the gladiators and they have them have to advertise products, because I want to quote this: film executives thought that people wouldn't believe it.
I vaguely remember. Oh, no. I confused it with the Lorax, which had a similar refusal. Because they had biggering instead of how bad could I possibly be in the Lorax. And the reason they didn't do that one is because it's entirely because they were worried sponsorships would get angry.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, in this one, it's no. Are you fucking kidding me? You could have what would it be? You could have Paulus's fucking hot dogs as your fucking advertiser.
Yes. Like that's the thing people forget is that gladiators, they didn't kill each other very often. Like gladiator fights to the death were very rare. It was more about the spectacle of the fight, and this is why gladiators often would basically become, well, they were like gym bros, but they were gym bros that were kind of fat.
More like, the best way to describe it is take professional wrestling, only you arm them with a sword, and occasionally it's okay if, like, the fucking Undertaker legitimately kills a guy.
Yeah, like so basically these guys would go out and they'd go out into the arena, and they'd fight around for a while. And a good fight would often be, there's a good fight's one where there's somebody gets a good cut in or some good blood. One of them signals basically to the referee that I'm done, I'm tapping out, and then that's the end of it. And it's a lot like a prize fight, right? These are the big events of the night. Like, you'd have your, in the morning you'd have your executions, then you'd have your animal shows, then you'd have men versus animals, then you'd have men versus men towards the end of the day. And then if you had a really big event, that's when you'd have a guy that says, like, I'm gonna do a death match, right? This is one where someone could actually die.
People who are sent to who are gonna die anyway, and to die.
To be executed by gladiators, yes. This was occasionally what would happen, is that you'd have the entertainment basically was that if they can somehow win, they'll be freed. They're given a stick. The gladiator has a sword and a shield.
The gladiator is sponsored by Biggest Dickest Cement.
Biggest, thickest cement. The thickest and hardest you'll find in the city.
That's another thing. Yeah, the Romans had their own cement/concrete. So yeah, you could actually have a gladiator advertise for something that's stupid.
One of my favorite ones is from Vesuvius and Pompeii and all that, is you had graffiti including gladiatorial advertisements, which often boiled down to I shop here. And it was literally like how you look at like a modern sports star. Like, if Michael Jordan was a gladiator, he'd be like advertising everywhere. Right?
The Air Jordans that Michael Jordan had now could totally be a thing back then, because it would just be this brand of sandals he wore.
Yeah, it'd be, I go to this sandal maker shop, and this is the only sandal maker shop that I go to where I wear these because they're really good. So go and shop here. The Romans even had fast food.
Yeah, they had their own version of the corn dog, if I remember it, where it's like skewer on a stick thing.
Yeah, they had a lot of that.
And it was I think it was like boiled in, not quite garlic juice, but like a garlic oil or something.
They also had a favorite was garum, which is like a fish paste that they'd slather on basically everything.
We used to have a thing called we used to have our own version of fish sauce called garum. It is disgusting. Like, if you actually make it in real life, it is the second worst fucking thing that the Romans liked. The worst fucking thing being asafoetida.
Well, you know what they say, don't knock it till you try it.
No, it's pretty terrible. Part of it's probably an acquired taste, but it just does not.
It smells like butthole, but you can use it as a fish sauce and it's fine.
Yeah.
Some maniacs would chug that shit with wine.
Where the fuck have you had ancient Roman toppings?
Oh,
yeah,
people recreated them because they're in recipes books.
Wrote this shit down. They wrote like entire recipe books down.
One of the most famous one was Epicurus, who legitimately spent his entire life being a rich fat fuck, trying to get all the recipes. That's why the term Epicurean is a thing.
Yeah,
because he's like, here's all of the glorious recipes, and I think he eventually killed himself because he couldn't afford this fine dining anymore. Like, oh, I can't eat fried swan tongue anymore. I am fed up with this world.
Yeah, there's also, of course, the fact that the Roman, like, when we're talking about like all this other stuff, the gladiators and all this, and is that the Romans in many ways are basically just us 2,000 years ago. They had public shitpost forums, which was just the walls. They would write the same.
We all know about it. We all remember the man's public declaration of homosexuality on the on the walls.
On the walls.
My favorite one was, it was a conversation between two citizens legitimately randomly talking about the quality of the whores at the fucking flop house that they like to go to.
Yes, there was a lot of that where you this is the ancient version of Yelp, was literally on the walls of a brothel. You'd go and look at it because you're like, oh yeah, this is the best whore. No, that one's a skank. Go with this one. Like, like that this one gave me an itch.
One of the best ones is they actually got into an argument with each other on the wall.
There's another one that I loved where it's literally there was a guy that wrote inside of someone's house how bad of a host he was.
That's my favorite.
It
takes a certain man to just go right into their fucking house.
Absolutely destroyed this man in his atrium. Just wrote down, this dude is fucking tedious to talk to, and left. What a Chad.
So if you're wondering, here's some of the lexicon. Agricolas are vampires who keep a herd. It's a term for farmer. Appian Way. The Appian Way is the most well-known road system. It is essentially the main thoroughfare highway throughout Italy.
This is where all of Spartacus's gladiators were crucified.
Mm-hmm. The arena. This is just where people fight and die, or race. Though hippodromes are much more common for that.
Yeah, racing was extremely popular.
Races can be done in arenas if you don't have a hippodrome, which is a version of the arena that's purely designed for racing. You can do it in the arena.
Someone did calculations, and possibly the most paid athlete of all time was a very, very famous chariot driver from the Roman era.
I think he made something like 100. If you calculated for today, he made like $200 billion.
Roughly 200 billion, yes.
Basically, like 10 times more money than literally everyone in the world.
Yes,
like because Jeff Bezos is rated at like $1 trillion, but that's because that includes Amazon's value.
Yeah.
No, this guy was just paid.
This guy just got paid that much because he was that good of a chariot driver and kept winning all the big competitions.
What about the guy who was yanking it during Pompeii's eruption? That man basically knew what was going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, when the sky starts raining rocks, I think it's about the time when you're like, yeah, we're all fucked. And that's how a couple of people died at Pompeii is literally pumice stones hitting them in the head.
Arians,
which is why they.
This is during the early Christian church.
The early Christian period, yes.
I forgot what feat of media it was, but I thought Pompeii was a made-up event just for like action back in the day.
Biggie,
I was a small child back in the day. God damn it! It was some book I read.
My favorite is I think it was
the Magic Treehouse.
Yes, it was the Magic Treehouse.
Yeah, it was the Magic Treehouse, wasn't it? I was about to say because they had one where they went back in time to around Pompeii to fetch something, and like Hercules saves them.
Oh, that was Herc.
Yeah, it was Herc that left them. Yeah, that was the
Disney's Hercules saved them.
Basically, yes.
Speaking of which, is Disney's Hercules in Requiem for Rome?
No,
not one of the inspirations.
Did they wave away Herc by saying, "Oh yeah, he was just some vampire. He was some big fucking vampire."
In Old World, they might have done that. In Old World, they might have done that. But yes, they talk about the Aventine Hills, like all the various hills of Rome, the circus, the consul.
Of charioteering.
Yeah, one of the big ones
too.
The corn dole, which is very important because corn, you've got to remember, refers to grain. So anytime before really the New World is found, anytime someone calls it corn, it isn't corn. It's probably wheat.
Another one of the 7 hills, the Camarilla, which is the governing of all Roman vampires. The Capitoline Hill. By the way, they go into details about which of the hills are which. If you're at the Aventine Hill, you're basically in the Hoboville.
Yeah, they also talk a bit about like some of the slang of the era, including how to call someone else a cocksucker in Latin.
Yep, Corndole, Church of Cult of Augurs, Dominus,
Illuminator.
Esquilin, another of the 7 hills, the Goths, which are the most well-known of the barbarians at the time.
Yeah, it's
Greens,
also
which
important.
Is one of the other factors of the charioteering.
Yeah, the greens and the blues were the big ones, or I think they were also the whites and the reds. Yeah, they kind of died out over time.
No, they
the
came
greens
back
and the
in
blues.
the Byzantine Empire period.
For a short time, but it was still the greens and the blues.
Well, yeah. Illuminator, an insulting term for a weak or useless vampire. In living slang, it means a male who fillets other men.
Yes, again, as I said, this is Latin for calling someone a cocksucker.
It also specifically refers to Deva who manipulates others from a position of weakness.
When you said somebody for cocksucker, I was just thinking of that one gif of EDP sucking on that water bottle.
Humentum, a derogatory term for gangrels, literally means a beast of burden.
Aleno, Oleno, a vampire who grooms mortal vessels to conform to the taste of kindred. In living slang, a pimp.
Meretrix, in living slang, a prostitute.
It's a derogatory term for the Deva.
I like that they actually put that effort into it.
Yeah, they even have like a couple of like little bits about like, so this is what they call themselves, like the Propaquinus or the Propaquini, which literally means someone from Rome, basically. And this is where the reference, possibly the Venturi, comes from, which is the Traditores, which is, you know, the traitors, an unnamed clan destroyed and erased from history by the Camarilla. Well, what if they lived and sold them out later?
What?
That might be where the Venturi comes from, is a clan that the Julii thought they killed off, that hid among them, and then let the Strix kill them all.
That's a possibility.
It is a possibility.
Could also be one of the other
like.
weird vampires that just never got joined in with the lot.
With the rest of the kindred, yeah. Which is funny, because the Nosferatu were able to adapt to it. But you know.
The Umbra, derogatory term for the Maquette, in living slang, an unwanted guest, literally a shadow.
Yeah, basically the shadows in my room. You know, like someone, because that's a very Roman way to refer to someone you don't want around you, but you've got around you as a shadow.
Oh, and Nosferatus are called worms.
Yes, brother worm. They basically, nobody knows how many Nosferatu there are in Rome, because they all basically, whenever asked, they say, I am merely another brother worm. So yeah, that's how they get around basically being, you know, because they violate like a lot of the principles of the masquerade, which is you can't be seen and they're fucking duck ugly. You know, it's like, okay, then here you go. You're a Nosferatu, you know, like you're a worm.
Here's Vampire Lady holding a Senate placard.
Yeah.
Ab Urba Condita, the history of Rome.
Yeah. Do what you will with your days. I will rewrite the facts of your time on Earth 100 times over the next 1,000 years. Severus, the shadow of Thrace. So that's obviously a quote from a vampire. And then there's one from Tacitus here, which is pretty great too. It makes you want to laugh at the stupidity of the people who think that the tyranny of the present can erase the memory of the generation to come.
Yeah. Basically, this is just saying that you can try to year zero or modify history all you want. You're not going to perfectly pull it off, though.
Yeah, you never are.
So here's the thing: Rome is shit in the set time you're playing, but this is Rome. It has been around for a long fucking time. And while there are some things that have really changed, like the death of the bloodline of Constantine, that's happened. The Chi-Rho of the Christians has replaced the eagle as the standards. By the way, fun fact, the Persian Empire, the Sassanids, actually said something along the lines of, it's a very different lot that we face. The soldiers of Rome have become far lesser than they were when they worshipped the sun rather than their corpse god.
Yeah, they were very eloquent about that. Where they're like, the Romans are kind of sucking now.
Followers of the corpse god when they turned to Christianity.
The corpse emperor upon his throne. Death to the false emperor.
I just thought that was kind of neat.
Let the Mediterranean burn.
So the Catholic and Arian churches fight over who will decide the future. It was never much of a fight.
It wasn't. The Arians were always kind of in the minority. So, they never had a lot of influential power brokers, and God. Also they had fucking Saint Nicholas like suplex their main guy in the middle of a council.
Yeah. Okay, so to give you an idea, there were a variety. Besides Arianism, that was just kind of the most successful out of the early divergences. Other ones, one of my favorite fucked up ones is adoptionism. Have you ever heard of that one?
Haven't heard of that one.
Okay, all this shit is just going over my head.
Okay, so adoptionism is like one of the. It's not the first heresy, but it's one of them. And the concept is Jesus wasn't actually. Jesus became the Son of God via the baptism and sacraments and all that. So technically, you could all kind of become adopted by God too.
Which is a very fun one, and it's a surprise that one didn't take off.
Are you
Honestly,
telling me I can become the Messiah too?
You could become like Jesus. I vaguely remember what happened was it was mainly popular in some regions of, I think, around Thrace, and then
yeah,
got squished super fucking hard by both the other Christian branches and the Romans themselves.
yeah, because it's a little sacrilegious to say that you can be, adopted by a divinity.
Yeah, so basically it got squished on by both sides.
Yeah, despite it being a fucking radical idea. Like it's like if you're a good enough person, you can become part divine.
Another heresy actually came over the concept over because you couldn't profess your faith at this time. So what a lot of them would do is they'd walk back in public and then still worship in secret, and those were called the relapsi. The relapsi, there was an entire row over whether or not to even take them back because they were forced to commit apostasy essentially to save their life.
Yeah.
And the hardliners lost that one. I forget what they're called. Donatans, I think.
Yeah.
Donatans also had an early form of iconoclasm where they actually rejected the concept of iconography to a degree. They weren't
There,
hardcore on that. Don't forget the
there's
Gnostics. Well, there's a bajillion of them.
there's so many flavors of Gnosticism.
There's
Like
so
that's
many.
one of the things where it's like the Gnostics, the only reason they didn't take over was mostly because the educated people that were with the Catholic faction, I guess you could call the Nicenes, really went to fucking town on them for being so fucking out there with their beliefs.
Also, on top of that, they kept arguing with each other on it. Not like
Yes.
murder argue, but like they just squabbled.
Meanwhile, the Nicenes would literally murder argue with people. They did this regularly. They would kill other factions off. This happened a lot in early church debates. Half of who won in the early church was literally which guy has the bigger stick when he takes to the bishops' meeting where they will beat the shit out of each other.
But yeah, the Arians at the time they were mostly a big thing because the concept of how they did it was more popular among barbarians.
It was more palatable to the Germanics because it wasn't a bit, you didn't have to think about it, and there was no mystery element to it. It's literally Jesus came after God, he is subordinate to God.
Well, also it kind of makes sense because of the whole like just a descended like avatar of the
Yeah.
god sort of thing.
Or more accurately, the divine blood continued on. Like it's the same thing with a lot of heroes or other gods where they're
It made more
descended
sense
directly from
because
another
of their
god.
hero sagas, yeah.
Yeah.
Although that actually reminds me, this is before the really weird one, which is the nature of Jebus.
Oh fuck, that whole debate. Oh no.
Where it's like, how is it split? Was it both divine
Is
and
he
human?
is he more human or is he more divine? Or
Is he a mix
is
of both?
is he
Is he
separate
one or
from
other?
God or is he part of God?
You
That's the
know what
big
one of
thing
my
with like
favorite
the
versions of this one is though?
what?
Ever heard of Apollarianism?
I have not quite heard of this one.
This one's fun. Basically, Jesus's corpse, the body was human, but his mind, the logia, that was
Oh wow.
divine. So he had a mortal body, but a divine brain and soul.
I
That
subscribe more.
sounds about right for a lot of like Greek people talking about this shit.
It was most pushed by not the Greeks in general, but the main founder was Greek. You can kind of
That's a very Greek concept, yeah.
I subscribe to the theory that we actually were supposed to meet Jesus all along. It was actually Satan in disguise.
That's a fun one.
Well, funnily enough,
I was making a joke to the Mandela catalog.
well, no. Here's the funny thing, though. You want to know why one of the names for Satan's Lucifer?
We
Because around the same time as Jesus, there was actually about 3 to 5 other people who were allegedly the Messiah at that time.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot of other people
one of them
claiming to
had
be the Messiah.
had the title the Son of El because he named himself after the morning star, the glowing light of Venus.
Yeah, or El, or Elohim.
Hence why he was called Lucifer, the shining one.
Yeah. So basically,
But yeah, Rome has been around forever. Chapter 1 is a big thing that just
Chapter
goes into
1 is
details about
basically goes in for like the Empire has been here for 2 centuries. The 3rd century though is when the collapse really begins.
Yeah, this is
right?
where Rome keeps killing itself.
When Diocletian comes into power and brought order to chaos, the Roman Empire was barely recognizable. But the Camarilla endured. The Proquini endured. The Eternal City may not be the capital of the empire anymore, but Rome is the heart, and every Roman from Anatolia to Eboracum knows it. The same is true of the Prophet Quini. But in this 11th century since the foundation of Rome, things have changed in a way no one could ever have imagined. A religion that denies the ancestral gods of Rome has become ascendant. A sect outlawed since Nero and nearly extinguished under Decius and Diocletian became, under the tutelage of the victorious Constantine, the religion of the state. In reality, Constantine wasn't really much of a Christian.
He just used it as propaganda.
Yeah, he literally just backed it because he was like, if I get a bunch of religious fanatics behind me, it'll be easier to take control. And he was right.
Were the Adamites around, or is that later? The thing is, Adamites
are later.
Well, no,
they keep popping up.
They first came around this time, and then they were violently crushed, and then they came back several times over the decades.
There's various times where they pop up, and it isn't too much of a surprise when they do, because it's a very simple idea of, obviously the original sin is civilization, ooga booga, return to monkey.
Also, ooga booga, I want to show my penis to women.
Yeah, also that.
That's a big reason for Adamites existing, in my opinion.
Without a doubt. I mean, come on.
So yeah, Rome is changing permanently in a way they can't really deal with.
And arguably, it's a way that really is hurting the Empire in the long run.
No. Actually, Christianity might have been the thing that allowed it to last another century longer than it did.
It depends on how you look at it. The part of the reason why I say that that's not the case is that Christianity adopting it led to a fuck ton of unrest.
Rebuttal.
Internally.
Look at what the fuck happened in the crisis of the 3rd century.
Also, I'm just going to say
look at that shit and tell me up to my face. Look at that shit and then say that.
Also, if you're going to talk about unrest, I'm just going to say it. Those Hebrews were uppity, man.
Oh yeah, we talked about how essentially after the 3rd Hebrew revolt, the Romans were like, hell no.
The Romans basically went, we're done.
We're done playing nice. And they were. They literally built bones out of roads out of their bones.
Part of the reason why Christianity spread the way it did, and as an apocalyptic religion, is entirely because of the Jewish diaspora that the Romans forced around. It's a lot easier to suddenly believe in a Messiah that was preaching the end of the world when you just saw your entire village slaughtered, you've been thrown into slavery, and moved out of Palestine.
Oh, and also your entire belief about your superiority because God protects you getting completely fucking shattered because these guys just wouldn't stop until you're all dead.
Yeah. There's a reason why it really catches on after that.
I still do think that you could argue Christianity killed. I honestly think Rome was fucked.
Rome was in the long run on the decline anyway. Christianity was just one of those other issues that
sped it up. I don't think it sped it up.
I'd say it caused a lot more problems than it solved.
Disagree. Strong disagree. Because you're basically saying that shit when the biggest bloodshed death murders happened a century before then, when they were less common. And it
happened a century after was when the real fucking murder spree went on. Like the thing that kills Rome is the constant civil wars, which really only kick off after the Christian era.
Hey guys, do you like how Tech's ignoring the crisis of the 3rd century, which is
crisis of the 3rd century, but that's a bit of a different situation compared to the crisis of the 5th.
All right. Children.
Oh, you mean after the barbarians? Okay.
Guys, ladies, you're most beautiful. We're talking about tabletop RPGs, not historical facts. God damn it.
Okay, I'll pull away my Jesus.
That's the era of constant civil wars. Like the 3rd century is a combination of crises. It isn't just that there was a civil war. It's that there's a civil war, a plague, various religious instability, a gigantic war with invaders,
demographic decline, farming decline.
It's a giant clusterfuck.
I'm just saying that it wasn't purely Jesus that did it.
No,
All right,
it was
I'm
not.
gonna make this easy. You all get one.
Well,
y'all
speaking
get
of
one.
all this, and what we've spent like an hour and a half talking about, they then put a big thing up that goes, history isn't important, and then they go, okay, actually, history is really important, but telling a story is more important with this. Like,
which is fair. I'm just look. I'll throw away the crucifix. You throw away the trilby. Okay, it's okay.
I'm not throwing away the trilby here. What I'm saying is that like
Get back on topic, you fucks!
we are on topic here. Fuck you. But basically what they go and they say is that like a lot of Roman history was made up itself. Like the idea, like a lot of the things that they said was fake, and they knew it was fake. The point of it was the moral.
Yeah, like the 6 kings of Rome probably weren't the way they were.
Yeah. The truth went beyond facts. It was about universal moral truths. Besides, a lot of the Roman history has to be. Remember, they had their entire city in records burnt down at one point, so they kind of had to piece together everything before that again.
Brennus, I think.
Yeah, that's when the geese warned Rome, and they fucking forgot. They fucking didn't actually win. Thank you, geese. You were still better than the dogs.
By the way, speaking of dogs, look at this horrifying fucking art on page 26.
I know, yeah. Suckled by the wolf. But yes, basically when the Camarilla falls, it's all fucked, basically, for when it comes to the kindred. They then talk about the Romulus and Remus, and here we go. By the 21st century, only a few fragments will survive from Macius Valerius Corbulo's Epilon de Mortal Remo, the death of Remus, which is the Roman vampires' account of all their things.
Yep. And here it is.
And this is the guy that supposedly founded the one of the bloodlines of the Ventru. And what they say is, none dare defy the elder twin and see the younger lies. His lifeblood spilled in a soaking stain. Half within and half without these yet to be built walls. No brute beast comes to feed on Remus. The moon rises and he stirs a little, dying unknown, and yet not yet without breath he cannot cry out. All for ill-fated Remus is to open one eye and see the moon. And he sighs, for an inauspicious shadow descends. It has the shape of an owl, a man's voice. Son of Mars, I have come to bargain, it says. For the issue of Romulus are fated to rule over all and to endure for 1,000 years. This I know. I offer your line equal posterity and more, if only you will agree to pay due respect to my own family when the right time comes. Remus blinks assent, and the owl seems to grow and obscure the skull-pale moon. He rises to his feet. Come sunrise, none remark on the absent remains, and great-hearted Romulus' sleep is vexed that night with visions of the inauspicious twin.
So, okay, this is a nod to, I mentioned Satanels. The Strix are a thing they bring up in Requiem. And effectively, they're... Ooh.
They are basically they made a deal at some point with some vampires where it's basically yeah, eventually you're gonna have to give us your bodies, and the vampires told them to fuck off, and they've remembered that. They've remembered that they've been fucked by you.
The best way to describe them are they're kind of demons, kind of like traditional demons that possess corpses, spirits.
Yes.
They're really awful, but
they're also similar to vampires, aren't they?
And it's to the point, like this legend here. Really?
This might be the truth.
They might be Strix that actually have successfully integrated with a willing person.
Yeah. That might have been the reason why Remus is a vampire that creates something akin to a kindred. It might be the reason why kindred exists, is spirits like this bonding with dying men.
Clans of kindred.
Yeah. Possibly 2 or 3, who knows?
It could also be, this also leads to an interesting concept. What is really different from a vampire than a sin eater, if that's the case?
Really? Well, the difference is when you consider where they get their food.
True,
sin eaters don't need food. Sin eaters still need to eat. Sin eaters still need to breathe. Sin eaters still need to do that. They can die and come back. True, but that's through their connection to the underworld.
Yeah, but
vampires don't have that connection. They have to take their life from others to continue. Sin eaters can continue indefinitely. Yeah, it's a weird thing, but it's like, what's the difference between a Geist and a Strix. Well, one of the big ones is that the Geist was once human. A Strix was never human. That's one way to look at it. This is what happens when you make deals with spirits.
Here's another fun one. Geists, vampires, and Olgan, which are one of the Prometheans.
Yeah.
All come back due to the aid of spirit.
Of a spirit of some sort. Yes.
And each manifest in a different way.
That's true. Mind you, you could argue that geists aren't in that group because ghosts aren't really spirits. They're different.
They kind of are.
They kind of are, but they aren't.
They still have their humanity aspect.
Yeah. Meanwhile, spirits were never human. When it comes to Olgan are torn apart by various spirits and then pieced back together.
And on top of that, spirits don't stay in them. It's the
right.
goo.
They move on. Behind. They literally just bind them back up. They rip them apart and bind them back up, much like how you would.
But who's not to say that that's how a gangrel formed when the spirit didn't move on?
Exactly.
In another case, it might have made it just an Olgan. But
who knows?
Spirit, for some reason, stuck in.
Yeah, there's a lot of this where you can go and you can make little connections in New World that you couldn't really in Old because of how the cosmology works.
I just, it's interesting now that
it's interesting. Yeah, when you think about it. Now think about mummies for a second. What about mummies? Aren't mummies undead too? Yes and no. Mummies basically exist outside time.
Because of the massive amount of human sacrifice to power the ritual to allow them to break free from time.
Yeah, they are by their very definition immortal, timeless beings, and also about eldritch abominations. Mummies are fucking weird and scary and terrifying.
But yeah, Satanel made a deal with Remus. That's how the Julii likely formed.
Likely. And it's also important to note that the city needs children. So this is the first thing they go into is the rape of the Sibylline woman. They're going, Rome really doesn't have the best start.
It was won by men and built by men, and men flock far away, exiles, criminal, freedmen, and men looking for a new life. Because because remember, in their legends, they were founded by survivors of Troy.
Yes. Well, the tribes around them are survivors of Troy, and then Remus and Romulus are descended from Aeneas. And also Mars is their father. So
because that's how Greeks do.
Because yeah.
And then after that, they then decide to
then Romulus Romulus then kind of, murdered his fucking brother. So there's a reason why then that you look at that and then they're like, well, so he murdered his brother. Should we trust this guy? With marriages and all that. The answer to that is no.
And his response is to create a big fake series of games.
He's going to create a big fake feast and then steal away the woman. The Romans then agree to pay repatriations to the Sabines for their daughters and their sisters, and then they intermarry. And that's how the Romans kind of dealt with their neighbors. They take what they want. And it kind of continues.
Yeah, this kind of establishes their early relations with what become known as the Socii. See, the Imperial stuff better than I do. I'm more of the early Republic period.
Yeah.
Once you get to past Sola, I'm a lot blurrier on.
Yes. So Dead Remus, of course, watches the fruits of all this shit, and he's like, this is fucking awful. You're a fucking asshole.
Like, you killed me just to claim sole rulership over the city. Okay, dickish, but whatever.
Dickish, but understandable. Then you try to ignore the consequences of your actions and make everything worse.
And then on top of that, you decide to then, under false pretenses. By the way, I know this is going to a franchise, but if you tried that shit in the World of Ice and Fire, you'd have been fucking slaughtered to a man.
That's the other thing.
Because that's violating guest
rights. The only reason the only reason he gets away with this, arguably the only reason he gets away with this, is because he pays back the neighbors.
Yeah, that technically means the Romans almost lost that war, probably. Because that's the thing. Romans tend to ignore their losses or minimize them. They'll respect enemies and they'll say like they were really good, but if they get their
The
butt
story
kicked in a
the
war,
stories of the
they tend to
Sabians
minimize it.
basically come down to the woman had to save Rome by begging their fathers and brothers not to murder their husbands and children. So basically the woman saved Rome, which is something that they don't like to admit. The woman that they raped and stole saved Rome by basically getting Stockholm syndrome. Yeah. Not the finest hour.
Here we go. Remus then created the Julii by essentially effectively doing the same thing Romulus did.
Kind of, yes. So basically, he goes and finds this guy called Aulus Julius, a distant kinsman, and he was just unlucky. He wasn't able to get himself a waifu. So he was bitter and noble, and he comes to him and goes, "Hey buddy, you're going to be able to live forever because there needs to be more than just one of me. Like, like that's part of the deal. I have to have children." And he's just like, "Oh, what are you?" And I'm like, "I'm a fucking god, bitch." And so Remus takes him to a cave, his molesty cave, and under the Tarpeian Rock, which is where the Senate of the Camarilla is to this day, and embraced him and turned him into a vampire. And he only finds out that he's deceived him after he fucking kills him and brings him back. And then, of course, Julius basically tells him, you fucking tricked me. Like, I should have met the god of death, and you pulled me away from him.
And then Remus's response is, "Okay, start digging."
Start digging, bitch. And of course, his because the owls need children to feast on. I'm gonna have to get busy. I need you to dig a home for all of us. And then dominates him probably to go and fucking dig out just dig out the whole thing.
I also like the nod that they call him Orcus because Dis Pater, the Roman take on Pluto, Pluto/Hades, might not have been the original god. It might have been the hairy, one-eyed giant Orcus. That was the original. It
probably
god
was.
Of death.
It almost certainly was, and
because
in
of
the case
the Etruscan influence, because the Etruscans actually had him as their god.
Yeah, Pluto was originally a wealth god for the Romans. Then he got merged more with the Greek version of Pluto as they invaded various Greek-speaking peoples along the island and traded around with them. And so, therefore, Hades and Pluto merged because they were just natural. They were both rulers of underground kingdoms with lots of wealth. It kind of makes sense. They merged together.
And others followed. Kindred families sprang from Remus's bloodline and Julius's. Rome grew, and the first of the kindred dug themselves a home, burrowing like Hecate's mouse. They used the burial vaults of the Etruscans, a place for the dead, for their... Yep.
They took part in the building. A second city parallel to the one above grew around the catacombs. This became the place where the kindred retreated, and where they would meet atheist Galileans who would retreat when the emperors of Rome righteously pursued them. They're basically talking about the early followers of Jesus, who often were called the Galileans because he was from Galilee. And also, they were often called atheists because they didn't worship any gods and engaged in ritual cannibalism, which was fucking weird even by Roman standards. But yes, the city of the dead is the necropolis, and it is the one that survives. It's basically the setting for this game is partially in the city above and the city below. The city below is the necropolis. Every vampire of Rome has a place in the necropolis. It was once small, and now it is expanded out. Anyway, Rome kind of gets into a weird situation where Romulus is the great founder and a great leader. The people of Rome fear him and do not love him. And eventually Romulus dies in a fucking battle, right?
Yep, and he has no tomb.
He has no tomb. Romulus has an issue with basically the story. One story is that he got abducted by Mars himself. Another one is that there was a big battle. He died in the battle, and they couldn't find his corpse afterwards.
Well, actually, no. During the battle, a fog bank shows up, and his peers around him, basically, since they were sick of his shit, since he was becoming more feared, they took the risk and fucking hacked him to pieces, and then said, "Oh, we couldn't find him."
Yeah, and of course the original and popular legend is of course Aeneas, and by the time this all happens is of course that the connection between Aeneas and the Romans is basically one that's done so that the Romans also have a great ancestor myth like the Romans. It's almost entirely a fabrication of people like Virgil. Really, it's their epic because they need an epic, right?
Well, yeah, because otherwise, what are they? Some dirt farmers that got conquered by the Etruscans?
That conquer the Etruscans and
Eventually.
then yeah.
Tyranny and liberation, the kings. Yep. Okay, so there was a period of time where Rome was ruled by the Etruscans. They eventually get kicked out. And the fall of the unnamed clan.
Yeah. In the 100th year since the vanishing of Remus, Aulus Julius took upon himself to rid himself of two scourges. The cruel Striges and the blood clan of whom I must not name, whom Julius proved to have adopted the mantle of the Striges' servants and voices. This is where I say, like, this is possibly the Ventru. Because remember, the Ventru, according to some of their own tales, were with the Trojans. They come from Troy. They come from that area. They followed over and then they got here. And they were the ones that ended up making the deal with the Strix to be like, hey, leave us the fuck alone. We got these jokers over here, right?
Especially since the Strix, remember, Remus made a deal with them too.
Yeah.
And they're coming back going, okay, it's time to give us your heart blood.
Time to give us those what you owe us, but motherfucker. And Remus, of course, disappears before that can happen. Conveniently. So he either died or went into torpor or just went away,
Well,
or possibly was murdered.
Knowing how he's the twin brother of Romulus, and they're identical twins, I wouldn't be surprised if he pulled his brother and fucking left him in the fucking lurch.
Yeah, he's just like, peace, I'm out. I know what's coming. I'm leaving my child to deal with it. Like, if I'm going to be immortal.
Either or.
It's also that basically he might have just said to them, yeah, you can do whatever the fuck you want with my children that I've created now. We're even. And then
they
fucked
show
off.
Up and then Julius is like, no.
Julius is like, no.
And the owls are like, are you fucking what, mate?
Yeah, for the prophet queen, the indignities heaped upon them was so the Julius came for the kindred and said now that they wanted more. Now he said they not only asked for the ancient tithe of blood and for the constant excavation of new tunnels under the city, but for the tithe of mortal relatives whose corpses the owls were, using.
Yeah, because the spirits, these owl spirits, whenever they possess a corpse, they tend to go full debauched, insane zombie thing.
It usually doesn't last long either. It starts to decay from their presence inside of it.
And they go full weird nightmares, like drug zombie.
And I mean, one of their things is that they say, like, okay, so the Strix also, that's probably what the deal was with Remus, was I'll give you some of my childer to be bodies for you.
Because when the Strix possesses a vampire, that doesn't really decay.
Yeah, that body can't decay. So there you go. Aulus Julius spoke firmly in response to the eldest representative of the clan, whom I must not name, said that Remus had made a compact and it must be observed no matter the consequences. Aulus Julius spoke most firmly in response. To accept this indignity is slavish and weak. Are we not Roman? Are we not kindred? And what are they? What are they to make these demands? What are you to bow your head before them? He accused them of witchcraft abominable to living and dead alike, learned from the foul outsiders. The assembled Procini raised a cry of seething rage and fell upon those he had claimed betrayed them. So basically, they coped and seethed so hard that they fucked the Strix up a bit.
They turned into an angry mob, and yeah.
They impaled the oldest of their servants on a stake cut that night from one bough of the sacred oath. The rest of the oak, the rest of the traitor clan followed. By the end of that night, Julius reduced every one of the traitors to dust, but not one of the Proquini drank even the tiniest drop of blood from any. They collected the dust and scattered it from the peak of the Tarpeian rock just before sunrise, intoning dire curses over any who would seek to treat with the Striges again. As for the clan that served the Striges, its name was stricken from every record the Proquini ever kept, and to speak the name was made a crime punishable by final death. Eventually, the kindred who knew their name sank into torpor or met their final deaths, or forgot, for the fog of ages obscured it. As far as we in the Camarilla know, no one walking today, alive or dead, knows what they were called. If they are mentioned at all, they are known as the Traditores because they betrayed the living and the dead alike.
They're the Ventru.
They're probably the Ventru. That's my personal theory on that, is that this was the Ventru.
Also, this is right around the time of Tarquin getting kicked out.
Yeah. As the Republic comes in, everything kind of hits the shit, right?
Well, yeah, basically, the Republic, they set up all of their things. Like, there's the entire greasy pole of power, starting with the Quaestors and then the Aediles, blah, blah, blah. Then there's the consuls. There's only consuls and praetors, blah, 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 blah. But effectively what happens is Rome then kind of gets a bug up its ass and starts to try to expand.
Yeah. They basically start to go towards other neighboring city-states and say, basically, hey, like the Sibyllians and a few of these other like the tribes of Latinium that have kind of all bonded around us, why don't you join us? You don't want to join us? Here we go, buddy. It's time for war.
Yep, some of them just kind of did because it's not a big deal. They were trading already, and the Romans actually did what was similar to the Greeks. Actually, they would set up colonies. At least early Republic Rome kind of did that, although theirs was kind of a mixture of economic and military forts.
Yeah.
Well, the Greeks would just kind of move there and form their own little economic niches, like throughout the near world.
The Greeks would move there and form like actual full cities and colonies.
What the Romans would do is they kind of make a fort and grow from there.
Yeah.
Occasionally they'd build like a little merchant agora, a little forum market, and then do the same thing. But yeah, some socii kind of worked fine. The Sabines as a whole tended to be pretty okay with it. The Piscenes tended to be somewhat okay with it. I think they might have revolted once, but honestly, that's pretty fine. Capuans were fine with it because they hated the Samnites, so those were pretty loyal socii to them. Then you get to the fucking Samnites.
The Samnites are basically the other tribes just to the south of Rome that really don't like this fucking idea and live up in the hills.
Yeah, and on top of that, it took 4 wars for them I think it was 4 wars to put them down.
It took a lot of fighting to beat them,
and that's 4 official wars when they were independent. That's not including the multiple revolts. And to give you an idea, every time that Rome was threatened, such as during the Pyrrhic War, the First Carthaginian War, the Saphonites or the Samnites always revolted.
They basically took whatever chance they got to rise up.
And Rome eventually got sick of their shit and effectively forcibly depopulated the region.
They took them into Rome properly,
and basically
moved them around Italy, and then repopulated the region with other settlers.
Because they were just getting sick of it. I think this was around the time of Sulla that they did that finally.
Yeah, they were just like, fuck it, they're not...
It was either around the time of Sulla, or it was after the Second Carthaginian War, or maybe the third one.
Yeah, essentially, the Romans were no strangers to genocide. It was usually their final solution, though. It was not their initial response.
Not like the Assyrians.
No, the Assyrians were basically like, anything you do, genocide time, which ended up biting them in the ass very hard later on.
And it's kind of sad in an ironic way that that's what they're dealing with now. Because yes, the Assyrians are still around as a people.
Yeah.
Not many of them left, though.
But basically, yes. So anyway...
Rome's a thing. We kind of... Oh, yeah. Gaul sacked the city. That does happen.
Yeah, Gaul sacked the city. There's, Epirus comes in and fights a bunch. Rome takes a bunch of its neighbors under as basically puppet states and vassal kingdoms, or absorbs some of them outright. Depends kind of how things are going. And then the Camarilla basically starts to form, which is the Senate, because there's a Senate above. Aulus Julius says, you know what? As the living do, the dead shall do. We're going to form a Senate. And he made a Senate.
And
it's called.
If you're wondering why Pyrrhus invaded Italy, it's because the Romans were encroaching on. There was a variety of city-states in southern Italy on the boot, known as Magna Graecia, and essentially the Romans were starting to encroach on it. In particular, they were fucking with the city of Taras, who was like, hell no.
Yeah.
Taras was hardcore. It's not surprising they said hell no and actually fought back, even when Pyrrhus did nothing to save them half the time. If you're wondering, Taras is one of the Spartan colonies that was actually relatively successful. Yeah, the city of Taras, the Tarentines were actually Spartan-inspired, raised by. They were also well known for their cavalry. They actually had the second or first best cavalry in Italy besides the Capuans.
Yeah.
But yeah, Camarilla was founded. Julius Senex. Oh, also Elysium. That's a concept that he invents.
Elysium. He's the one that supposedly came up with it.
It is also called the Forum Propinquorum, where the vampires of Rome meet and decide how they'll govern themselves.
Yes. The people of Rome live as long as the empire endures by omens and auguries. They fear werewolves and witches. They do no business on inauspicious days. They fear to linger too long at crossroads and flee from the screech of an owl. Every Roman family has a mind for pagan tradition, has its lares and penates, hereditary spirits and beneficent ancestors who guide Romans and watch over them from the afterlife. And every family has its lemures and manes, and ancestors who didn't get to the right afterlife, the malevolent, unfortunate, and inauspicious ones who bring disaster. And that's what the vampires of Rome pretended to be.
Mainly because it made it super fucking easy to get blood.
Yes. The ghost-bearing flesh. So Senex knows that for all supernatural power, they will always be less than the living because they're not alive, and because they have not died with true honor, they've been denied the afterlife. So he makes that Senate because he knows that he's a monster, and monsters need rules.
Yep.
Right.
Like, to give you an idea, by this point, he's fine with eating blood from children, full-grown men. He casually murders people. Like, he knows what he is.
Yes. And to the Julii, who will one day bring forth Caesar, he is both Lar and Manes. He is the honored dead. He's the one that guides them. He creates their patriarchs. He's the family devil who controls their bloodline through ghouling and all these are in their minds as well.
Also a little bit of Old World of Darkness here, in that he orchestrates quite a few members of his gens quite often.
Yes, he does.
There's the Julian Paterfamilias who tries to break free of the family curse. He falls ill and dies without anyone knowing why.
He's trying to tell the family something as they wait beside a deathbed. He goes blank, forgets his words, as if some hole has been gnawed in his mind.
By the way, there's a type of vampire that does that.
Yeah. A great-grandson of that rebellious Julian finds his beloved children eaten by feral dogs one morning. The slave who blank-eyed let the animals in has fallen on a kitchen knife. This man's grandson tells the family god that he will not prostitute his children to a dead senator whom Senex wishes to please. The grandson awakens in his bed beside his virgin daughter, a child but no longer a virgin. He does not remember the act. The family leaves the child in the streets to die.
Yeah, this is just to give you an idea on how nasty fucking Julius is.
Yeah, like he plays with them out of whimsy. He's a fucking monster. More than 300 years after his basically, here's one of the things, right? Senex demonstrates the things that he can do to them. He torments them in any way he wishes, even as he shows them how to advance themselves among the society of the living. He loves them, he hates them, he wants the best of them. But one night, he simply stops visiting his relatives and does not return. More than 300 years after his death, he fell into torpor. The Prophet Pliny, who still described the leaders of the Camarilla as the old man in his honor, sometimes whispered that there is a solitary columbarium somewhere deep in the necropolis where he lies and whence he might be awakened. Some of the elders of the Camarilla might even know where it is. They never tell if they do. Most of the Prophet Pliny thinks that is for the best.
Well, yeah, because if he wakes up now, he'd probably be even more insane.
Yeah, the Camarilla survives without him for more than 7 centuries, and the groundwork he laid ensures that the Camarilla remains strong. Only when the Christians seize the empire does the Camarilla begin to weaken.
And that's mainly because they get competition.
Yes.
And it also weakens their source.
Yes.
Ah, yes, Delenda est Carthago.
Carthage must be destroyed.
Ah, man. So yeah, Carthage or Carthagast is a very interesting. It is kind of in a way a reflection of Rome in its own way, and it's
Yeah.
also the greatest of the Phoenician cities that were ever made.
And of course, it has the best Cato of all time, Cato the Censor or Cato the Elder, who's this
Every
immensely
speech, every
every
speech.
speech. He's a moral and virtuous Roman, and in every speech, like he is the pinnacle of what it means to be a Roman man at this time. And at every speech and every meeting of the Senate that he's at, he always ends it with, and also Carthage must be destroyed.
Which is amazing.
Which just goes to show you the dedication of this man to his objectives. It doesn't matter what else he's talking about. He will always include in his speeches, and Carthage must be destroyed.
So
Every single one.
So if you're wondering the best way to describe Carthage is, imagine so the Phoenicians are actually pretty closely related to the Canaanites, and they're very closely related to the Jews. They're Semitic-speaking people. They actually had their own version of the alphabet. They actually were probably one of the first to create the alphabet that the Greeks used, although theirs is somewhat different because Semitic language. And they were notorious traitors and constantly warred with the Greeks heavily, to the point where when one colonized an area and the other did, they tried to genocide each other because they were that bloodthirsty when it came to mercantile antics. And the way the Phoenicians did it is they set up trade cities. Carthage is not the oldest. Carthagast actually means the new city. The oldest in that area was Utica. But Carthage, because of its position and just due to immigration, became the most powerful of the trade cities to the point it began dominating the other ones and controlling them itself.
Carthage is situated in a very good position for that as well.
They also invested heavily in their navy. So the way Carthage's system worked is they relied heavily kind of on a mixture of mercenaries, but also what they had their own citizenship caste system. The Phoenicians, your Carthaginian citizens, were at the top, and they traditionally were not brought into the military. The only time they were what's called the Sacred Band. There was the Sacred Band, which is dedicated to, I believe it's Baalzebul, the Lord on High, their sky god, effectively. And most of them, though, traditionally either fought as militia and almost never, because it's a waste of manpower for them, because their true value was in sailors. Most of them made a lot of money as sailors or merchants. So
hey, what the fuck do you want, kid?
Oh, also Greg's back. Welcome back, Greg. He's returned from the dead. He is our vampire.
I am sperging hard about Carthage right now. Don't worry.
Oh, he's dead.
Don't worry. The fucking what's their name in the Bruja do that a lot too in Old World. We remember Carthage.
Yeah,
Carthage was great.
The difference is I actually know how Carthage fucking worked.
Yeah.
So okay.
It wasn't how the Bruja remember it. That's for fucking sure.
So okay, to give you an idea, Carthage originally was run by two sophets, which were actually judges. If you're wondering, yes, early Phoenician society also was run by judges, and that includes Carthage. It's not until later that they kind of get rid of that system, and instead they create their own equivalent of a senate, where it's an oligarchy. It's similar to the Venice.
It's very similar to Rome, actually.
Rome and Venice, because it's primarily driven by wealth. And on top of that, oh yeah, I was going into the caste system. The actual armies were traditionally either Phoenicio-Libyans, which were usually their most reliable soldiers, or Iberians, which tended to be the most tactically flexible. They would also recruit Celtics, and they also recruited heavily from the Numidian peoples, which were kind of your proto-Berbers. They were kind of mercenaries, kind of not. They technically were under suzerainty as either vassal states or directly under economic control. And the thing is, because they're a mercantile state and army, they didn't focus on army, they focused on navy. That's why Rome kicked their shit in repeatedly. But anywho, Carthage and Rome actually used to get along very well. In fact, they were allied for a good while.
They were allied in Sicily for a while, and then they both tried to claim Sicily, which is where the real conflict started.
Oh, it gets even more fucking retarded than that. Okay, so this is after the Pyrrhic War. Rome is won, and Magna Graecia is theirs. a group of dissatisfied Sabines eventually overthrow the Republic of Messina, the city-state of Messina,
Right. Up
and
in Gaul.
form the Mamertine Republic. They
Yep.
fuck up, and they beg Rome for help. This goes against, by the way, the trade agreement they had with Carthage, because when they allied to aid them navally, Carthage openly stated, "You can't land on Sicily, pal." They let the Mamertine thing slide because they were going to invade them anyway.
Yeah.
But if Rome stepped foot on Sicily, it's on.
It's on. Then some of the city-states in Sicily asked the Romans for help.
Syracuse, the Mamertines did, and Syracuse did because they really fucking hated Carthage. To give you an idea, Carthage waged 3 wars against Syracuse, and they could never quite beat them. So Rome's like dead ass, and they fucking go to war.
By the way, Syracuse is that place where a certain dictator would imprison people inside of a bronze bowl and get off on listening to their screams.
Yep.
It's also where Archimedes is from.
Also, fun fact, Elagabalus really liked the bronze bowl execution method himself.
Yeah. Bronze bowl was used by a lot of different people.
But anywho, the Romans scratch build a navy and are able to actually defeat them.
Right.
Carthage looks back. I'm just going over this because I know. Carthage kind of has a crisis of faith because they got their asses kicked. That's never happened to them before. They've lost, but not like this.
Yeah, this is a massive shock.
So, and one of the families essentially creates a blood oath to fucking get revenge on Rome. The Barcids. They vow vengeance to kill Rome because they lost a lot during that war.
You say family, it was one dude and his son.
Hannibal Barca and yeah.
Well, no, Hannibal Barca was the child.
Yeah, the guy before him, I think, Hanno. Hanno essentially builds an entire political. It's like Cato the Elder. He's the equivalent. He builds an entire political assembly and faction in Carthage, whose whole purpose is conquer Spain so that we can then get the resources and men to fuck over Rome like a train. Like, he single-handedly built a political faction, not just to expand his power, because he had a lot of it in Spain, but also solely to get revenge on Rome.
Yes.
Which I find kind of funny. Second War actually is really painful for the Romans, because Hannibal Barca is a really good fucking general.
Hannibal basically manages
He won almost every fucking battle. It's just he couldn't win the war.
Well, basically, he wins battles, and then somebody, which is Fabian, the consul, has this brilliant fucking idea, which is, I'm just not going to fight the guy. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to make sure he can't move on Rome. I'm going to corral him in various areas, and I'm just never going to allow him to give me battle. This is where the term Fabian tactics comes from. And it's a fascinating little strategic exercise in how do you defeat an opponent who's superior to you in all aspects with supply? And the answer to that is force your opponent to not be able to get supplied.
And that's effectively what he had to do.
Don't fight a battle. Don't engage him.
That honestly sounds like a no-brainer.
Well, yeah, but it's a concept that's actually pretty novel at the time. To give you an idea, the only other nation that kind of came up with the concept was China, because Sun Tzu's Art of War actually had a chapter similar to it. And even then, the Chinese didn't do it that often. Remember, Sun Tzu's Art of War was written for Wu, but Wu didn't even fucking use it.
It's also that the term in kind of what Fabian is doing is that he's still fighting some battles. You've got to remember this. He's still engaging, like, for example, Hannibal's scout forces. He's engaging foraging parties. He's just never engaging the main body. The main body of Hannibal's army.
He's not doing what Hannibal wants.
Basically, yes. He's not letting Hannibal get him into open battle. Anytime Hannibal is threatening open battle, Fabian pulls back, arranges more troops in the area, and basically says, okay, you want to fight this one, Hannibal? And then Hannibal looks at the situation and sees that he's outnumbered, and he's not he doesn't get to choose the battlefield.
Essentially, slow bleeds, and also relying, because remember, Carthage is still a republic at the end of the day. Yeah, the Barcids at the time had a lot of influence, but they were losing the longer the war went on. because this was
It's
bad
also
for business.
yeah.
Also, because this wasn't a one front war,
and they were getting their asses kicked in Spain. Yes.
So meanwhile, yes, Hannibal can't leave Italy because if he
by the
tries to
way-
leave, Fabian comes in on him as he's boarding his ships, and he loses that battle.
So
Which, by
Hannibal
the way,
knows this. Fabian knows this.
Right, hello.
Yeah.
Which is added pressure. Hannibal left his son in charge of Iberia, and
Yeah.
this is all a big family affair.
Yes, it is. And so, meanwhile, in Spain, the Carthaginians are getting the shit beat out of them by Scipio. Not yet Scipio Africanus, but this is, I think, his father.
His father, yeah.
Which is Fabius Maximus, I think. Then, so Scipio then.
Well, actually, Cornelius Scipio was also later on, like near the end, eventually force him to flee.
Yeah, eventually Hannibal pulls his forces out of Italy, and Fabian just kind of lets him go because that's the main objective, right? We've won Spain; they can't go back there, and there's a negotiated peace where actually, is there a negotiated peace in this one?
Not yet.
Not yet. That was after. So basically,
from Coyote, Hannibal's plan was to try to rally the Socii into revolting against the Romans.
Yes, that was his plan, and it probably would have worked.
No, it partially succeeded.
Yeah, it did. Like some of them did
Samnites
declare.
Obviously did. I believe the Bruttians, which are southern Italic-speaking people, also did. The Lucanoi did as well. Some of the Greeks did. But the critical ones that did not were the Capuans and Piscenes, as well as the Etruscans. None of them fucking rose up. That was the critical failure.
And do you know what the gracious reward the people of Rome gave their consul after Hannibal was driven? They immediately voted him out of office.
They immediately voted Fabian out of office because he wasn't aggressive enough.
Yep.
It sounds stupid, but remember, from their perspective, you just spent the last year hearing
letting
news
him
and
rampage
seeing the results of seeing your country be burned in blood, while your leader just sat on his ass. Yes, and just occasionally wiped out any men that got a little too close.
Fun fact: this is actually why Russia was such a goddamn bloodbath for the Russians in Napoleon's time, because I forget the name of a big general they had fighting Napoleon, but he essentially wanted to rely on Fabian tactics, but eventually was forced to, I think at Borodino, fucking fight. He didn't want to, and there's a reason why. He got his shit kicked in.
Because unless all the land that's getting burned is land you really don't care about, your base is going to want something to be done about it.
And that's why Fabian got his shit kicked out. By the way, Hannibal losing like that, his family loses all fucking influence.
Yeah, because Hannibal is chased back to North Africa. The Romans follow after the Hispanic campaign is over and beat the shit out of him outside of Carthage. That's what ends the war. Now, the other thing is that Fabian, by not engaging, probably kept the other Socii from actually rebelling because the Romans still had an army in the field. They're not defeated.
Yep, the only ones that did were traditionally troublemaking ones, mainly in the south.
Yeah. If Fabian's army had been destroyed, it's very likely that they would have said, fuck it, the Romans are done for, and risen up.
Oh, yeah, but by the way, Hannibal didn't just lose... You really are missing... Hannibal didn't lose all political power. He had to run from Carthage.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, he was exiled.
He was a dead man there.
Yeah. By the way...
He would later unironically... become the solidest snake of the ancient world, just running around all of the ancient world, helping anyone that had a bone to pick with against Rome.
Yep. And then 50 years later, Carthage by this point was fucked. They were not going to be able to fight Rome.
And they broke some of the treaties, and then they're gone. Rome goes in and just fucking wipes them out. Salts the earth, all that sort of shit. Carthage is destroyed utterly and completely, and is annexed into Rome.
Sweet Helletic sins.
Yes. So then this is when the Romans then finish off the last resistance in Italy, especially Sicily and up in the north. They then also start to move into
Greece.
As well, because they finally have the manpower and aren't distracted by all this. It's also important to note that this is partially a response to the King of Macedon during the Second or Third Punic War declaring war on Rome. This is literally to the Romans a defensive war.
Fun fact, the Romans actually very quickly cottoned on to how trivial it is to smash apart a Diadochi army. Mainly because by this point, they forgot the main elements of why Alexander's army worked so well, because they always had the anvil, but they usually lacked the hammer forces in the form of the cavalry.
Yeah.
So yeah, essentially the Romans, because they dealt with shit like this before, in the form of the Carthaginians to a degree, as well as other peoples, their response was to just kind of do what the Samnites did and form into little square blocks and fucking screw them over. The phalanxes can't deal with that.
They adopted the Samnite tactic of how they dealt with the Roman phalanx, which is we go up into the hills and into uneven ground, and otherwise we don't try to fight it head on as best we can.
And we dance around in square units essentially through. And the Greeks couldn't deal with that at all.
A lot of it is also that every infantryman was also a skirmisher in the Roman model because they all carried javelins, which was incredibly important to helping deal with a phalanx formation.
But yeah, effectively, because of that, the Romans become more and more Hellenized, because the thing is, the Romans actually had a strong admiration for Greek culture. They thought them, in a way, frivolous, degenerate in a way, but they also really admired a lot of the stuff they did.
Yeah, because they'd been in contact with the Greeks for forever. A lot of their cultural habits and language and education came from them. Because remember, the Greeks have had a history of writing a lot longer than the Romans and the Italians have. Or more accurately, there's probably some Italian writing around, but it's Etruscan and no one can read it anymore.
Yeah, fun fact, the Etruscans actually are so different as a language, they're not even Indo-European.
They're really weird. The Etruscans,
the Tyrcinian language branch. You could also find there was another language we found. We suspect it might have been Proto-Anatolian language before the Hittites came in, possibly.
Possibly, yeah.
Because we found other languages. Ironically, this is maybe where the Troy bullshit came from, because
it's refugees fleeing possibly the Bronze Age collapse.
The other language we discovered were on islands not around Troy, but not at Troy itself.
Yeah.
Like, we found a similar language on islands and on the coast of Turkey somewhere.
Yeah. Then we get kind of into the really fun bit of Roman history, where it's like, so you like civil wars, right? Well, you're about to enter
conflict. Here we go.
You're about to enter about 150 years of civil war with some short breaks.
So yeah, senators basically kind of realize it's really easy to get mobs of people to die for you by just promising to raise the amount of wheat they get and just bread and circuses.
It's also that at this point they're making a lot of money because you know all those soldiers that Rome had from the Punic War? Well, their families got sold into slavery because their landlords, who are often senators, took on collected the debt that was owed to them. So these soldiers went home and they've got no money. And so they've got to sell their family farms and stuff, which means that they can't be soldiers anymore. Now, technically speaking, this requirement was often waived. But at the same time,
it was definitely waived after the bloodbath of Hannibal.
Yeah, it was, but it kind of came back to an extent, and then it became an issue because suddenly Rome has a massive frontier, and it has to defend it, and they don't have enough soldiers.
To put it in terms of this thing, essentially because of war, the rich got richer and the middle class evaporated.
Yeah, actually, that's completely what happened.
The rural middle class specifically evaporated.
Yeah, the middle class in the cities was fine. The rural middle class fucking evaporated because massive slave estates suddenly became extremely common and very profitable.
Yep, the latifundia system, essentially because of the sheer size of land, it was damn near impossible for anyone outside of the city to make a living. At least not as an indentured servant.
And
or
what do
slave.
you think happened to all those people who lost everything?
So what Rome tried to do,
I was gonna say they fled the cities, but okay.
they either fled the cities, but what Rome eventually tried to do, I think this was Marius's idea, is we have all this fucking frontier. Why not just, if you fight for us, you for like X amount of years, you get this parcel of land.
Oh yeah. By the way, as a later note, one of those this will come up later. The Romans never actually solved this whole big estate problem.
Oh no,
they never really do.
They occasionally try, but then it dissolves into political violence every time.
Yeah, but saying listen, this system of massive slave estates in the Italian peninsula sticks around until the collapse of the Roman Empire and beyond.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, how the fuck did this stick around as long as it did? And the answer to that is corruption, and also that it's just profitable. The other answer to that is that, well, they fought about 3 civil wars about it anyway, and the landowners managed to win often by giving massive concessions to the ones without land. And the social wars are almost entirely about these concessions. The social wars basically happen because the Italian allies realize that they're getting the short end of the stick, and this is where Sulla comes in as well. They kind of get into this massive fight over, so what does it matter to be a Roman, right? We don't get Roman citizenship, so we don't get any of the protection. So the Italian allies, who've been oftentimes the main source of manpower for Rome's armies, are getting fucking shafted.
Demolished, yeah, they would always go to the Socii.
So the Socii go, we want compensation. The Roman Senate goes, lol, no, fuck off. The Socii basically all get together and go, so you know Rome? Yeah, fuck those guys. So they all rise into a massive rebellion, which Sulla ends up fighting along with Marius. The main thing that happens during this is that they even mint their own coins, which show the bull of Italy impaling the Roman wolf upon its horns. And eventually, they basically get what they wanted by the end of the war, because while the Romans are kind of victorious, they realize that they're going to be fighting this war for the next 50 fucking years, and they don't want to do that. So they go to the Italian allies.
This is just Italy. This doesn't include the stuff they conquered.
The provinces are also starting to rebel. There's also what is known as the Servile Wars happening at the same time.
The first
Servile
War.
And don't forget not too long, a certain man with Sparta in his name will be running around the southern Italy.
Oh yeah, the second and third Servile War, I think.
Yeah, that's later. That's way later than this. The third Servile War happens after Sulla's big day out, basically. So the Macedonians are also fucking around a little bit with Rome at this time. But not too much. There's also, of course, stuff going on in Anatolia, and basically the Senate goes, okay, time out. So what the fuck do you want, Italian allies? And the Italian allies go, we want the thing we asked you for at the start of all this. We want Roman citizenship. And so the Senate finally goes, okay, fine, you're all citizens. And that's kind of how the social wars end.
This is also one of the big reasons that the Samnite... It's the social wars where the Samnites end, because at that point, some of them did actually become loyal to Rome.
A lot of them were like, we just wanted Roman citizenship from the start.
Yeah, that's why their last revolt
rights.
Was during this.
We wanted protections. Yeah.
But yeah, as a rule, also this is a bit of a note. It's shown through history that pretty much any system, particularly one that even holds any usually democratic or republican virtues, which at this point Rome is still very much a republic, even if. But once you introduce things like political violence and military dictatorships, and
the Cornelii, the secret police.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when you introduce things like that, the rapid deterioration is near impossible to really hold back.
So
it also comes to the point where essentially the political violence, to some degree, is a result of, as I mentioned before, the land reform efforts. Now, this is also what results in the second major civil war of this era, where the problem is, so where is all the land for all these troops going to come from? Well, from the Italian allies, which is the entire reason for the social war in this first place. This is also when a guy named Gaius Marius ends up fighting a bunch of Germans who are trying to migrate into the northern Italy. They're called Germans then. We don't even know what their actual ethnicity was.
They're from Germania.
They're from the area of Germania, but we don't know if they were Germans, if they were a Gallic tribe, or whatever else.
It's simpler to call them Germans.
But it's just everybody calls them Germans because the Romans consider them from that area. Marius ends up fighting a massive civil war with Sulla. Sulla kind of wins, and then comes in the fun of the prescription lists.
But as they both know, both seize power. Marius has his 17 days, but he dies hollowed out with hate. Then Sulla takes back Rome, where he is elected. In so many
quote unquote elected dictator for life.
Mm-hmm.
Sulla then proceeds to roll back basically all of the reforms that were done over the last 15 years,
including this time. This is after the Gracchi brothers actually died to get those in too.
Yes.
By the way,
yeah.
Sulla's first act was to repeal the Gracchi reforms.
Yep. Oh, by the way, in case and they even have a little thing, prescription is essentially exile.
So it's worse than exile. It is
okay.
Sorry, you can explain that.
For a citizen of Rome, being sentenced to death was bad. Exile was worst, but getting prescribed was a cause for greatest shame. In times of emergencies, the leaders of Rome had the right to make a list of their enemies. They published it openly, accompanying it with an official statement that no one who killed these men would be prosecuted, and that anyone who did the deed got a cut of the men's property. And then the government sat back and let human greed and personal grudge take their course. Many Romans made their fortunes from prescription lists. The worst part of being prescribed was living in fear. The killing blow could come from literally anyone.
It's also important to note that these prescription lists often conveniently were rich landowners.
Most Romans who found out their name was on a list tried to flee. Not many succeeded.
Yeah, there were a couple. There's several famous people who were on prescription lists, such as Cicero. Julius Caesar ended up on one for a short time, if I remember correctly, and then
you're breaking up.
Sorry. Then Sulla ended his. I think Caesar ended up on one for a short time, then talked his way out of it. I know that there were several people that the prescription list of Sulla came back after the triumvirate.
Because Sulla was the one to create the first of them.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, that's there next. But let's wrap it up. Sulla has a bunch of secret police that come out and just do horrible things. And he before he's even dead, he begins he gets gangrene and worm stuff being found in him.
It's also important to note that he finds Marius's body, his grand rival, grinds up his bones, and tosses them into the river, so he can never rest in peace.
Yeah, that's how Romans do.
Yeah, that's kind of how Romans do. Sulla also has a comment about Caesar, which is very prophetic, which is that this man will be worse than Marius.
But he was an old crazy man by that point.
He was an old man, but he saw a bit of the truth in that.
But speaking of Sulla, though, one of his lieutenants, a certain Pompey, comes to mind.
Pompey the Great, who gets assassinated very casually as an afterthought. But anyway, Pompey cut his teeth, basically ending piracy, because piracy during this time was
also fighting in the social wars.
Yep, he was an excellent general in the tail end of the social wars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's also well known for swooping in, stealing all the credit for ending the Spartacan rebellions.
Actually, no, that's Crassus.
Crassus was no. I did a study. Crassus was there from the start. Pompey shows up literally in the last act of the entire war.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Pompey just
wiped out the armies after Spartacus had already been defeated and died.
Basically, yeah, he just mopped up and said, "I won this," And that's part of the reason why Crassus really didn't like him, because he forced Crassus, who had done everything to actually win the war, including all the strategy, the tactics, the fighting,
money spent.
Yeah.
And forced him to share his triumph with fucking Pompey. Who had already had a triumph, by the way, despite the fact that
the Greeks.
Yes. Also, this is around the time when we have the fun of the Poison King, Mithridates.
Another thing about Pompey, he was very Greek. He was very noted to be very Greek. Not just in the sense that he was, he always seems to be coded in any historical works as somewhat gay.
Very fabulous, Pompey the Fabulous.
Yeah, but he liked to believe he was the second coming of Alexander the Great.
Yeah, he did. A lot of very famous conquerors like to call themselves.
I know,
that.
but he really
leaned on it. Yeah, he really leaned on it. Yes,
which makes his death really fucking funny.
It is. So anyway, let's get into that whole thing. So Marius and Sulla have their big fight. Caesar finally comes into the stage, and Caesar does the thing that he does best, which is that Caesar walks out, goes and finds both Pompey and Crassus. He figures this out. Pompey and Crassus are the two most powerful men in Rome who are fighting each other.
They also fucking hate each other over...
They also hate each other to no end over the whole thing with Spartacus. Caesar, being Caesar, basically is known as a womanizer.
Every man's husband, every woman's husband, every man's wife.
Yes. He is oftentimes very much considered. There's a bit of a very famous bit where Cato, during what's known as one of the plots, I can't remember the exact name of it, that Cato gets a letter Caesar gets a letter in the Senate, because he is a senator. He gets a letter in the Senate, and Cato looks upon him and goes and says, "This is proof of his treachery. This is the proof of the treachery of Caesar, and we need to arrest him." And then Caesar's like, "You really don't want me to read this letter out loud?" And Cato's like, "Read the letter out loud, Caesar. Like, show us your
guilt."
And it's a letter from Cato's sister referencing, that she wants Caesar to fuck her.
Let's just say that it's not recorded by history, but there was probably a good amount of snickering and laughter.
It was very embarrassing for Cato, because remember, Cato's entire reputation, Cato the Younger, is around being the emphasis of Roman virtue.
Yep, dignitas, gravitas, sternness, seriousness, and
piety. And then his sister is like, "I want that dick. I want that dick real bad."
And Julius Caesar fucking read it in public to essentially the whole class.
A thing about Caesar that he was able to do is that he was really able to make people see his logic, and he's able to convince both Crassus and Pompey, two men with massive egos, that it's fine to hate each other, but imagine how much more money we could make if we all worked, and power we could all have if we all work together. Or at least didn't step on each other's toes.
Basically, his entire shtick that he went to these two and was like, okay. You're the two most powerful men in Rome individually. The Senate is afraid of you and is playing you against each other. Here's what we should do. I will marry Pompey's sister, and Crassus will pay for my campaign to become consul. Therefore, we can swap consulship around the three of us indefinitely.
And tell the Senate to go fuck itself.
Yeah.
Because Pompey has too many friends and Crassus has more money than God.
Yes,
that's not even a joke.
Richer than Croesus that's a different guy, but similar.
Yeah,
and then
richer
Caesar.
Richer than Crassus became a staying around Rome, which in the sense that more money than God.
And then Caesar.
Anyway,
Caesar controls the populace. Because that's the other thing. These two own, basically the triumvirate is built around this. Pompey controls the elites. Crassus controls the money supply. Caesar controls the crowd.
Because he's real good at working them.
He knows exactly what the average Roman wants. He is a populares. He is following in the footsteps of the Gracchi brothers and Marius himself, who he is I think the nephew of? Like the great nephew of or something like that? Anyway.
It's all complicated. It's all Roman.
Anyway.
We have to discuss why Crassus is rich, because this is one of my favorite things. He was an industrial. He was a progressive businessman, not a man, who realized there was a great source of income in the public service. He created one of Rome's first fire departments. In case you're wondering, though, it wasn't out of the goodness of his heart. The fire department worked as thus: his firemen, which were typically slaves, would show up at the fire, find the person who owned the building, and say, "Wow, this really sucks. You want help putting out the fire? If pay an installment now."
Essentially,
and then he would upgrade to selling fire insurance. And I say insurance in so many ways because it was just a protection rack.
He basically
essentially was
is the proto mafia in that regard.
And but it was all legal because no one had thought of this yet.
Also, I want to note this. This is where Cicero came in. Cicero was the lawyer for Crassus more than once. Same thing with Caesar as well. This is where a lot of these people made their money as well, and their reputations was in being legal professionals among the triumvirate.
Yeah. By the way, Rome at the time was always constantly on fire.
Yeah.
Because it was a burgeoning metropolis. It was a burgeoning metropolis with no real building codes, especially
most of it was made of wood.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so on to this. The triumvirate falls apart because here's the thing. Pompey has his military.
Crassus dies. Crassus dies.
Well, Crassus is about to die, but the main thing that happens is this. The political enemies are starting to realize that the weak link is Caesar. Caesar is the one that is holding this entire fucking thing together, basically by the force of his personality and by the fact that he's boning Pompey's sister. Now, this kind of gets into a bit of an issue where Crassus is kind of the other weak link. Crassus, compared to Caesar, who has the love of the public, and Pompey, who also has the love of the public, Crassus isn't very well liked.
He has no glory. He has no glory because he had to share most of his because
Pompey.
That Morgan Spartacus, while hard fought and bitter, was not very popular with anyone because, let's put it this way, Crassus was a brutal military leader even by Roman standards.
Right.
And
so the army hated him. So his army hated him. The people didn't like him because he was more cautious than the others, who got themselves killed. But fuck them.
And
right?
Last but not least, his protection rackets.
Right.
Oh yeah. No glory, no love.
So he, if I remember correctly, this I for some reason, I could be wrong. He then decides he gets a bug up his ass and goes, "I need to get glory." So he goes to take a fight against the Parthians, right?
Yes. He goes and says, "We're going to go fight the Parthians because the Parthians are making trouble on the Roman border out and around Syria."
I wanted to make sure because it could have fucked it up, and it was the second triumvirate. I was right. So I know.
Yeah. The second triumvirate also fights the Parthians. That's what Antony does.
And that's why I wasn't sure. So Crassus, because he has tiny PP envy, and the Senate's trying to work on that because they really want to break this up, he decides to pick a fight with Parthia. And it's not entirely stupid because he was a fairly a decent military commander, just a brutal asshole. That's doable. The problem is the Romans aren't really used to fighting the Parthians. So the Parthians are an interesting duck in terms of Persian dynasties.
Because they're not Persian.
More so than the Seleucids, which also weren't Persian. So the Parthians replaced most of the.
Well, they're not even Iranian. Okay, let's put it that way. They're not even Iranian.
They technically are. They're Dahai, which is related to Iranian, but they don't even speak Persian. They speak some fucking other language. The Parthians started life. Essentially, they're the proto-Ilkhanate. They're horse nomads.
It's because I say they're the proto-Turks.
Proto-Turks and Ilkhanate. In that they are a nomadic people that have conquered a much more civilized settled people, I should say. And because of that, their style of war is still very similar to when they were on the plains.
It works.
It works. It does pretty good against most people. And
Crassus.
So Crassus is lured into thinking he manages to rout the army, of the Parthian army. They swing back around because the thing is, yes, the Parthians did have land infantry, but they were mostly crap levies with wicker shields, and they're like your archer spearmen shit. Persian Empire is not known for its heavy infantry, and the Parthians especially not. They were
there to hold the line and die.
They had them, but they usually relied on mercenaries for that role.
And in this case, they relied mainly on their herds, because to give you an idea, an average Parthian noble was expected to have hundreds of horses and to outfit like entire units himself.
And as we all know from anyone who's played Rome Total War, horse archers are some fucking bullshit.
So they sweep around and essentially trap him, I believe, in where Ctesiphon is, or around north.
It's from he died at the Battle of Carhae. Oh, by the way, funny note about especially this whole thing. He actually could have had help because the king of Armenia offered to assist, but Crassus refused. He didn't want to share the glory of this with anyone.
Crassus didn't want it to look like he needed help from a Roman vassal state.
Because that would make him look even more embarrassing.
That would be embarrassing. Even if he won, it would be embarrassing.
And his
remember,
glory
this is
would be
entirely for prestige.
Because he needs it. In his head, he needs it, and honestly, to a degree, he kind of did.
Well, as an added thing, just to really hurry this up, Crassus didn't even have the dignity to die in battle. He was captured, and then when hostage negotiation broke down, they gutted him.
Oh yeah, didn't they use his head as a fucking hand puppet in a play?
Yeah, they did. Crassus. They eventually send his. I think they eventually send.
Oh yeah, by the way, he also lost the Legionary Eagles.
He did. That's the biggest dishonor of all. They used his head as a hand puppet. The Parthians were hard ass.
But specifically as it's mentioned, Plutarch mentions that Crassus was dressed as a woman and paraded all around Parthia to see. When they executed, when he was eventually executed, it doesn't actually say what they did with his body. But regardless, doesn't matter.
I know that it's either the Parthians or the Sassanids. They because I know they use his head as a hand puppet. That's pretty great. But I know that they also once skinned another Roman and essentially used his skin to make furniture.
Oh yeah, that's later on.
They went full Simici.
Yeah. In any case, Crassus
fucking dies, and the Senate whispers into Pompey's ear, "Yeah, Caesar's gonna betray you."
Well, that's a bit later. So first off, Caesar then.
It's more.
With Crassus dead.
Yeah.
Caesar has a problem. Crassus is the one that's been keeping all of his creditors at bay. Crassus is dead. Caesar has to do something very big, very fast.
And he didn't leave nothing for Caesar.
Oh no, he did not. Pompey is basically now it's Caesar and Pompey. Of them, Pompey is much more popular. Caesar is extremely popular among the
mundanes, the disgusting plebeians.
The Senate, however, views Caesar's connections to a sort of a maybe coup attempt that Cicero has a hand in stopping. It's like the Catiline conspiracy or some shit like that. There's Caesar has some enemies who really, really want him fucking out of power.
And because he now doesn't have Crassus to lead.
Oh no, which then triggers the a Roman ally in Gallica is under attack again.
Yeah, and we have to go. I have to go and stop that.
Oh no,
so,
Massilia. I think it was Massilia, wasn't it?
It was not Massilia. It was another tribe where there was a
tribe. It was
a tribe that was known as a friend of the Romans.
Oh yeah,
that had an issue with a tribe that was migrating into their territory.
The Germanians. They were fighting off Germanians.
The Helvetii, I think, is the name. Anyway,
the Helvetii were technically not Germans. They were actually also Celtic.
Yes, but they were moving into the region that he was
and
a Roman ally.
I gotta stop him, and then he just keeps conquering all of Gaul.
He of course then says right after this that there is of course this massive conspiracy against Rome that demands that he stays in Gaul, that demands that he keeps taking Gaulish towns and stealing their money this.
That demands he somehow invade Britain for half a second.
Yes,
but by the way,
then fight in Belgium
and actually does unify Gaul for one brief moment. They actually had it.
They realized that the Romans are going to fucking take us all over.
So the tribes who don't tend to like each other. In fact, actually, two of the tribes for centuries fucking hated each other's guts. The Arvedui and the Aedui. They fucking ally with each other.
Because it's
willingly
it's Godzilla. It's the Godzilla threshold. Unfortunately, Vercingetorix, while maybe not seen as equal but good enough, he unfortunately is held back by one thing. He's using a coalition, and the coalition would not agree to because he wants to go full guerrilla warfare and just go into the woods.
He wanted to do Fabian tactics.
However, let me finish. Well, no, not even Helvetii because that would at least involve holding key locations. He doesn't really want to do that. He wants to go full guerrilla warfare, and the council won't allow that because Well, they don't want to fucking see their cities burn. So he's forced to stick around, which leads to the giant ass siege of what's it called again?
The most nuts siege of the ancient world. What's it? Actium later.
Yeah, the double line.
Alesia, that's it. Alesia, where Caesar starts out by building a wall around the city. This is pretty standard tactics in Roman siege warfare and in siege warfare for forever. Basically, you encircle the city, you build walls and fortifications so they just can't escape. Then Caesar gets word that reinforcements are on the way. So Caesar, being Caesar, decides that the best tactical decision he can make is I'm going to build another wall around myself in order to keep them from attacking me directly. And this works. He, of course, makes... this entire time, Caesar is sending reports back home about the war. This is a massive propaganda.
Is real.
Hundreds of thousands of Gauls around every corner. I need all the help I can get. Please send assistance.
Seriously, every tribe is unified to fight us.
Every tribe is unified to fight us, and the good boys of Rome are coming in here, and we're winning almost every battle we face. And the sons of important noblemen are proving themselves as valuable soldiers for Rome, and they all love me. And this is actually true. They kind of did. Caesar's legions really liked the guy. Because he didn't take all the loot for himself, and he also allowed them to, make money.
Oh, also his tactics didn't get them killed by the thousands.
That was the other huge one, yes. Caesar was actually a very, very solid battlefield commander. He knew he was very, very good at positioning and using the terrain to his advantage. He was very, very good at this.
Like to waste men unless he had to.
Yeah.
It's really hard to make your men hate you when you keep winning and they keep living.
You keep winning, and the other thing is that he was always able to show up along the line, and he'd be running along it and being like, yes, okay, do this, do that, let's do this. And he made himself very visible, which for the ancient world as a commander is very important in both morale and also control of the battle. Caesar is very famous for at Alesia during the climax where basically they're trying to break out and break through the walls, that he's in the middle of the fighting wearing a very distinctive red cloak. That sort of he's a figure that everyone can rally around, and eventually he manages to get some cavalry around, flanks the one of the attacking armies, causes a rout, which causes a panic, which then the Romans slaughter the retreating army. Then Vercingetorix surrenders to him, is brought back to Rome, and strangled in a ritual sacrifice.
Yep. So speaking of Rome, all these
because of that success makes Pompey's penis feel small, and he gets scared and angry.
Basically, the Senate suddenly realizes that they have created a monster. In trying to exile Caesar and get rid of him, they have just given him a chance to instead become a much more powerful political figure, because he's not only wealthy, he's won battlefield victories that are much more impressive than Pompey.
Also, every governor or little fuck-off person who rules land in Gaul now owes direct favors to Caesar. Not even Rome, him.
And third of all, reminder, Rome was only sacked once, and it was by Celtics.
I like how we barely talked about vampires in our vampire video.
Well, this is the history of Rome, baby.
We're not the history of Rome podcast. We know that Mike Duncan's done it before, but we can do it just as good because we'll swear during it.
But to narrow this down,
Pompey has tiny pee-pee. He tries to fight Caesar. It doesn't go well. The Senate tries to censor him and prescribe him. He's like, "Oh, go fucking eat shit and die."
Go fuck yourselves. Basically strolls over
Crosses
the
Rubicon. That's what it means.
Goes into Italy. Pompey fights like a single kind of delaying kind of half battle, because basically Caesar goes to Pompey and sends him a message like, "Look, we can just tell the Senate to fuck off together." Like,
as a minor note, before you wonder about that daughter, Pompey's daughter died, so there's no
marriage. Now Pompey,
and that's why he's nervous about it. Yeah.
Caesar then offers Pompey his daughter as a wife, which Pompey then takes and dishonors.
Yep.
Basically, and that's part of the reason why Caesar basically justifies why he fights Pompey. So the problem is, basically Caesar does offer Pompey the opportunity to be like, okay, buddy, like, look,
we can have a triumvirate, like us too.
Well, it's just us. We can be the consuls for forever. It'll be fine. We just need to get rid of these guys in the Senate that hate both of us. Well, mainly me, because Pompey looks at this and says, "Well, I'm the hero of Rome. I can," because the Senate has been talking to him for forever. "I can do this," and he can't do this. He gets
because
defeated.
He also bought his own hype. Because I ended piracy. Yeah. I killed Spartacus.
Yeah, he kind of bought into his own hype, and meanwhile, Caesar's been out on the frontier for what, like...
He actually has fought wars recently, and his men are blooded veterans.
That's another thing.
Him to the end.
Pompey brings essentially the rear guard and some of his select personal yes-men to fight this.
And
Meanwhile, Caesar has veteran mercenaries, veteran legionaries, German auxiliaries, Celtic auxiliaries.
Oh, and hey, since he doesn't have to worry about debts anymore because he's saying "fuck that shit."
Because that's the other thing. Caesar is now possibly as wealthy as Crassus was. So
especially
Caesar goes,
since he's saying "fuck debts."
Fuck my debts. Fuck it all. We're all good. So Caesar goes and defeats Pompey. Pompey, like a little bitch, runs to Greece. Caesar follows.
He runs away to
loses
Egypt.
Another battle.
Caesar not before humbling the Senate.
Yeah, Caesar basically goes to the Senate and says, "All right, here's the thing. I'll forgive all of you if you release the order to kill me. If you don't, I'll just kill all of you." The Senate, of course, in their magnificent wisdom, looks at this idea and says, "Yeah, okay, we'll take it. We'll take it." Now, this isn't the only one that runs. There's a few like Cato that basically go, "This is fucking bullshit. You're a dictator. This is not Republican action whatsoever. We're going. I'm leaving. Fuck off." So Cato is also at this point somewhat injured. Actually, no, wait, he's injured later. But
after
he flees,
the conspiracy,
after sort of Cato.
Yeah,
you're thinking Cicero. Cato goes to Libya, but Pompey flees to Egypt
and gets killed.
Pompey basically
just stumbles into a civil war.
So basically, right now in Egypt, there's a bit of a civil war, kind of maybe about to boil up.
And her
brother husband. Now the thing with that is that during this thing is that the previous consuls had made some deals with Egypt regarding trade and all that, and Egypt is sort of a semi-Roman client state, not really, but they're their only real trade part. They're their only real partner. Yeah. Now Caesar is following Pompey. What Caesar wants to do is capture Pompey, because if he's got Pompey, he can make Pompey do what he wants him to do and look like a fucking magnanimous, wonderful man. Not really revenge, more that he'd prefer Pompey alive, because to keep Pompey alive is great hype for him.
Oh yeah, but they're saying there is not an insignificant part of revenge here.
There is some revenge. Now, the thing that happens is that the Pharaoh of Egypt, this is the dynasty that was established by the Greeks. The Pharaoh says,
I think it's Ptolemy the whatever.
Ptolemy the something.
The 13-year-old boy, by the way.
He's like 14 at this point. He hears that Pompey's coming. He sends a delegation to meet him with a single order: "Don't let this motherfucker hit the shores alive." So Pompey steps out of his boat and is promptly killed, his head decapitated, and stuffed in honey and sent to Caesar as an offering. Caesar is fucking horrified by this.
And pissed.
Number one, for two reasons. Number one, he didn't want Pompey dead. Pompey dead is useless to him.
And second, a very important Roman was killed by an uncivilized nation.
Well,
basically,
yeah, that's the excuse. But basically, yeah, this is what the fuck. Hey,
this is a violation.
Well, considering the excuses bought wholesale by Rome, it registered.
Defensive war kicked in.
It's also that, for one thing, this is a helpless guy that was seeking refuge, and you just fucking murdered him. And he was kind of my, brother-in-law. That's a bit of a dick move.
On top of that, for all of his fuck-ups now, he was a Roman hero.
Yes. Then Cleopatra gets
herself delivered into Caesar's room. Funny thing, that's not from like one of the weird legends. That's more stems from the historical record.
That actually
Cleopatra
did happen.
Basically sneaks in to meet Caesar, because Caesar at this point, you got to understand, Caesar's like a fucking rock star. The thing is that he is a master general. He's a master orator. He's a master writer because remember, he's been writing down about everything you could imagine about his campaigns and sending them out back to Rome to be spoken aloud and recorded and all this. He's very famous. He's very wealthy. He's very powerful. And Cleopatra, who is at this point I think 20 or 25 or something like that. Like she's not old, but she's not like young either. Like she's very much aware that her claim to the throne of Egypt is very tenuous, and having someone like Caesar around really fucking helps with that. It's also that both of them are educated people that enjoy Greek literature, the classics, philosophy of all kinds and stripes, and they really hit it off. Like they really hit it off.
They commit quite a lot of rumpy-pumpy to the point that actually they had a kid.
Caesar has a son with her, which is to the Romans back home a bit of a like yeah, this is kind of not a good thing
because he's already been declared dictator for life.
Yeah,
his son is going to be pharaoh, which is a king.
Yeah, and remember, Romans kings don't like them. So Caesar, however, also has around this time there's a nephew of his that he's met named Gaius. Gaius is a pretty swell fucking dude. Gaius helps him deal with some problems in Hispania.
You'll know him for HBO's Rome, where he likes getting choked out by his wife.
By the way, funny enough, Adam, look what here they have it here. Crassus on stage.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, so Crassus so Caesar kind of goes and he's conquered Egypt essentially. Egypt is now firmly a Roman vassal state. He's
essentially de jure Uxorus, the pharaoh of Egypt.
He's not only that, he has essentially secured Roman domination over the Mediterranean in perpetuity. He has taken out the last couple of people that could even think to rival Rome, and is preparing a campaign against Parthia to get revenge for Crassus.
But he's looking like a king now.
He's looking a lot like a king now. Now, he's got a few generals that are with him, like, say, what's his name? Mark Antony. Yeah, Mark Antony is one of Caesar's right-hand man in the various campaigns that he was fighting in Egypt.
Even if Mark Antony privately seethes over him constantly.
Yeah, because Mark Antony is not exactly the greatest fan of Caesar, but Caesar does respect him, and Caesar does have him as one of his confidants, and Caesar also trusts him with, military matters. Antony is not exactly as fond of the fact that Caesar is kind of playing both sides. He doesn't like that Pompey died. He doesn't like the fact that Gaius is kind of hanging around. Octavian is also what he's known as sometimes. And then Caesar gets himself fucking killed, as we all know, famous Ides of March. Mm-hmm. The first thing that happens
fun fact,
after
by
this...
the way, just a little fun trivia fact. The Et tu, Brute, that is a comment, but it's also interesting because... it makes sense. The guy who does the finishing blow that the conspirators have is descended from the same guy who kicked King Tarquin out. They probably intentionally picked him to be the last stabber.
It's also notable.
I was going to say it's a funny note because in the play, everyone believes it says Caesar's throw his robes over his head so he doesn't have to see the blows coming. But there's another record that says he actually, if anything, he doesn't do that because Caesar always had one insecurity about him that he always made sure he never really had muscle on his knees, on his legs, and so while his upper body was kind of well built, his lower body was kind of stick-like.
Yeah,
so he always had long flowing togas.
He skipped leg day. Basically, Caesar skipped leg day.
So he might have. So if anything, he might have actually kept his robes down so that at least when he died without showing people his weak ankles.
His main thing, though, is that part of it is also that there were rumors that Brutus was in fact Caesar's biological son, with an affair that he had with his mother. Brutus was also a friend of Caesar's.
Mm-hmm.
He was someone he considered one of his
surprised and horrified.
Yeah,
it was why it was considered important to get him on side.
It was also why he was considered such a fucking this was considered such a betrayal. Yeah, because Caesar had made Brutus what he was by far. Then this is when the real fun starts. So we get this second triumvirate of
Lepidus. I think it was Lepidus.
Who literally just kind of one day just disappears from history.
Lepidus actually lives out the rest of his life as the governor of Hispania.
But essentially people like no one really writes records.
Nobody really
on
remembers him because Lepidus is only in this because he was a friend of Caesar's at one point,
and he's
got
room
a
and
power
said,
of the army.
"Yeah, I ain't fucking fighting for this shit show."
He knows right off the bat that the people that are going to be in charge are whoever Caesar appoints as his heir, and whoever the fuck Mark Antony backs, because Mark Antony has most of the army behind him.
So this is the interesting thing. So Gaius, a guy named Octavian,
yeah,
he gets into a pissing match with Mark Antony, and then there's also the whole Caesarian thing in play.
Yes. Now, the thing to remember is that Antony and Octavian are allies of convenience from the start. Antony was half expecting to be declared Caesar's heir. Because remember this, he can't declare Caesarion as heir, really, by Roman law. Because
that would be also kingdom building, yeah.
Yeah, by Roman law, she's not a Roman woman, he can't declare her as heir. That's first off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
Antony is one of his most famous generals who's been by his side for a very long time. He's got a very good chance of being, if not declared his full heir, his partial heir, and inheriting something of his wealth, right? And Caesar at this point is the richest man in Rome. That's a lot of money and a lot of power. It's not only that, whoever is basically acknowledged as Caesar's heir is going to have a lot of political power because, well, the people loved him.
People love him.
And that's the thing, because Caesar began investing pretty heavily into Gaius, who is his nephew.
He's his educated, somewhat sickly nephew who he likes talking to about philosophy and a lot of the stuff that he talked with Cleopatra about, actually.
So he put some good investment on that. And I think that's Octavian who suggested this, if I remember right. The second triumvirate, I think it might have been him.
It was Octavius who went to Antony immediately and said, "We need to work together."
Oh yeah, another reason that sends a clear thing. Mark Antony kind of wibble wobbles after Caesar's death for a few days before he firmly comes out on the anti-assassination crowd. Octavian, the second he hears the news, even before he's named heir, already begins plotting his revenge.
Because his uncle just got fucking murdered. On top of that, Octavian probably knew ahead of time that he was Caesar's heir. Caesar probably told him that if I die, I'm leaving it to you.
So, though for a posterity's sake, he made sure to appear very honored and very surprised when the news came.
Yes, it probably also was something of a shock that it actually was. He was the full heir. He probably expected to have to split it with Caesarion and probably partially with Antony.
Partially, a little bit to Antony, a little bit to Caesar. Maybe not a perfect three-way, but...
Yeah, now Octavian was never a fantastic general. What Octavian was the best at was not only politicking, but knowing who he could trust and working with them to the extent of recognizing talent.
And that's why he suggested Lepidus, because the guy clearly wasn't super ambitious. He was competent.
He's competent, he's not ambitious, and he is intelligent enough to work with us.
He's the guy. He is the guy. No, not like the guy, but the guy.
The thing is, he was also, I think they were also considering Cicero, but the fact of the matter is that Cicero immediately throws behind the Senate.
Also, for as famous as he is, from personality-wise, it's pretty clear Cicero's a prick.
Cicero is a bit of a dick. Now, having Cicero on their side would have been huge. Having Cicero on their side would have basically immediately ended any chance of civil war.
On top of that, if he wasn't pro-Senate, they would have definitely...
Yeah, they would have kept him alive. The problem was that Cicero, being Cicero, immediately lambasts Antony and Octavian for bringing back the prescription lists to deal with people. Octavian, I want to note this. Octavian likes to portray himself as a very good boy who did nothing wrong. Octavian 100% planned, plotted, and executed political assassinations, hits, takeovers, coups, murders, all that sort of shit. He was 100% down and fine with that because it meant keeping power.
From the historical records we get of Octavian, he is probably some degree of possibly a sociopath.
I wouldn't say he's a sociopath. No, he deeply cared.
He had a very selective empathy. He had very selective empathy.
Yeah,
it's more that he's cold-blooded.
Yeah, he's very much willing to murder if he has to. And he immediately sees there's a few things that go in here. First off, Antony goes off to the east to fight the Parthians.
I was more also getting to the fact that while he was charismatic, it always seemed he never seems to have that natural charisma.
Well, no, because Anthony. I mean, this is more the HBO show, but their take on him being a weirdo degenerate who's really bookish and is just a super nerd.
He
That's
was
probably...
a bookish super nerd. Like, that's the thing. Octavian is notorious for never having fought really any major battles himself. Octavian instead turns to a guy that's from a moderately wealthy family that he's known for a while, that he knows is a good commander named Agrippa. Agrippa becomes basically Octavian's right-hand man and most trusted confidant. And the thing about Octavian is that if you are loyal to Octavian, Octavian rewards you, much like Caesar did. So Agrippa becomes basically his right-hand man. He manages to... He's a better general than Antony by far. He's not extremely ambitious because he knows that Octavian isn't going to fuck him. And he knows that Octavian, if he wins, is going to reward him handsomely. Agrippa is the one that masterminds like a lot of the battles that Octavian fights in the Second Civil War after the Triumvirate.
Because the thing is, Octavian, he's not a good commander. But
he's a great strategist. He's not a good tactician.
He'll show up though to make it look like he can command.
Not really, actually. He just sends Agrippa. That's kind of what he does.
Okay. I just thought maybe he'd like show up occasionally, not like in the full front, like, but just to show himself there.
He spends more time in Rome because he's having to deal with a lot of political stuff in Rome.
True,
so he sends Agrippa around.
He has to prescribe which senators have to go away forever. Yeah.
Yeah, he's busy wrangling the Senate.
Also,
so
let's be fair, the dude's such a nerd. I don't think he'd want to ever go out.
He's also sickly. That's the other thing you've got to remember. Octavian has a bunch of health scares during his life. Even at this point, like there's a very good chance. There's a lot of the surprise for Octavian being picked as Caesar's heir is because the guy is notoriously sickly. To the point where like he oftentimes is bedridden. He oftentimes is, coughing, vomiting, nauseous, like lightheaded, has to lie down. He's a brilliant, brilliant man. It's just he's also kind of not a fucking nerd. Antony goes over, and Cleopatra has made some overtures to Octavian. The problem with that is that Octavian sees Caesarion and goes,
"As a threat,
this is an issue. We have to either disinherit him entirely, or we're not dealing with this. Like, because I am legally speaking,
I'm not dealing with a half-breed.
More accurately, I'm not dealing with someone else who's going to try to take my inheritance from me. Because Caesar picked me to be his heir. Not his son, me. So if you're not going to get behind me, you can fuck right off."
And she kind of realizes this is the end of Egypt. I'm going to have to side with Antony.
Basically, Augustus says, yeah, if Caesarion swears allegiance to Rome, declares himself not to be Caesar's heir, I am totally fine with him being governor of Egypt. And
Cleopatra goes, governor.
Not pharaoh, governor.
Because technically he's half Roman. He could become a citizen. At which point he would be a governor, not a pharaoh.
But hubris.
But, yeah. And he'd essentially have the powers of a pharaoh.
But hubris.
Well, it also means it wouldn't be inherited by their children.
Correct.
And that's the big sticking point.
Now, Octavius basically goes, and that ultimatum's thrown down. Antony goes over. Antony is in Syria and this sort of area that he's kind of got under his control, while Octavius is basically dealing with the fact that Gaul's in a mess, Hispania's in a mess. There's a civil war fighting around Sicily from one of the senator.
Because there are senator remnants that essentially are trying to rile people into saying "fuck this."
Yeah, so he's putting out fires in Italy and kind of dealing with all that. And meanwhile, here's Antony in the east, and it's wealthy, and Cleopatra slides over to him and goes, "I'll suck your dick. Also, do you want to become pharaoh?"
Also, and meanwhile, Lepidus is in Egypt. Maybe not Egypt, Africa, doing absolutely nothing.
Lepidus is just kind of chilling.
He's just kind of chilling to make sure things don't set on fire. That's his big thing.
Also, as a minor thing, Pompey's son is just kicking around Sicily.
That's what I was talking about with like having to deal with that. So that's finally dealt with. Octavian is also kind of looking around, and Antony is doing some fun propaganda stuff. Antony is declaring himself the second coming of Bacchus. Because that's a very popular god in the East, and also because Antony is a party animal. Like I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. He kind of is. The other thing with that is that Antony is making a definite move on Cleopatra, and that's a big threat. So Caesar finds, air quote, I guess he is Caesar because he takes the name Gaius Caesar Octavius.
Augustus.
Augustus is later. Augustus is after he becomes
I know, but that's what everyone knows now.
Yeah. So Octavian finds this thing and it says, oh shit, Antony's to declare himself king and leave half of Rome to his son with Cleopatra, to whatever kids he has with Cleopatra. This can't stand. This is an affront to Roman honor. This guy has to go. Now, that's when the second part of the Civil War really kicks off. There's the Battle of Actium, where essentially Agrippa styles on Pompey completely. It isn't even close. Pompey and Cleopatra kind of run away. Their fleet's gone. They're basically Antony commits suicide. Cleopatra is basically told by Augustus that she can retire to a temple in Rome and her children will be fine. They just won't be heirs to Egypt. And you'll be fine and taken care of and all that. And she says, go fuck yourself and commit suicide.
With a snake.
With a snake. Mostly, this is almost entirely because what she was going to be used as was propaganda. She was going to be toted out by Augustus as an example of both him conquering Egypt and as an example of his magnanimity towards his defeated enemies.
I forgot how Caesarion died, but I think it was just like...
Caesarion had an accident.
I figured.
Yeah.
Also, let's be perfectly honest. A rich, and even by the standards, even if this was propaganda, the most beautiful woman in the world. Yeah, there were plenty of reasons to not want to get taken alive.
Yeah,
definitely.
But the thing is that Cleopatra, by modern standards, was not like drop dead gorgeous, but she was decently attractive. She's not noted as a great beauty by anyone. The thing that attracted Caesar to her the most was her wit.
I know, but I'm saying she styled herself the most beautiful woman in the world, and that propaganda was bought.
Yes, it was.
Which was very clever of her. It kind of works because, let's see, managed to seduce the dictator of Rome. Well,
twice.
Mutually. Twice. That kind of gives you a bit of a reputation.
Yeah. So Cleopatra is dead. Actually, her kids with Mark Antony are adopted by both Agrippa and Octavius.
Hilariously.
Aside from Caesarion, they all will go on to become adults.
Well, yeah, they're no threat anymore.
Well, yeah, I mean, Caesarion really wasn't a threat either. It's just he kind of had an accident and died.
Accident.
There's speculation whether he was assassinated or not.
Hunting accident. Oh yes, that glorious hunting accident.
Yeah, like there's theories that he was off by Octavian. There's other theories that he wasn't, and it was just sort of like other people that killed him because they were worried. There's also theories that it was Agrippa that just acted without Augustus' approval. Anyway, back to the vampire stuff. Yay! Our fucking hour-long tangents on history, which is why you come here. We all know that.
Yeah.
Of us explaining history and saying fuck off.
They change point of view.
This is a letter from Caesar, supposedly. No.
Yeah, it's a big change of view. It's written in the point of view of like these are things.
Basically, that Sextus, the vampire from the beginning, came to Caesar and made him sign a letter, signing the knight over to the Camarilla.
Now, apparently, Caesar thinks this is all a dream. So,
also to the Invictus, basically, fun. Obviously, not true. Fun.
Also, not entirely implausible for him to just dominate Caesar and just have him fucking sign it.
So Caesar dies. There's a massive amount of like shit going down. Rome is fucking great.
Yeah, there's obscene graffiti marking every exterior wall. People are wearing purple edged togas, being teared to by slaves. It's great.
Merchants sell cloth, almost fresh vegetables, meat with barely any flies on them.
Criminal overlords hire gladiators as muscle. Drunken ex-soldiers pick fights with passerby. Yeah.
It's pretty fucking great.
The convert priests of the Mecca monarch publicly castrate themselves, giving themselves up to ecstasy and pain. I like how they gained an entire paragraph.
Boys, 10-year-old children become prostitutes.
The galley parade through the streets, playing tambourine, pipes, and drums, chanting praises to Attis and Cybele, blood streaming down their legs. There's a reason the Romans banned them.
Yeah, they're
because not only did they chop it off in public, so every fucking person, including the children, witness it, but they'll fucking dance and
those children who would later be who are paid 3 drachma an hour to suck.
Yeah, they got the dick sucking factory jobs, 9 to 5.
And then these assholes are fucking dancing down the streets, bleeding from their self-inflicted, likely suicide method, because that usually will fucking kill you. And these time periods, yeah, it will.
But yeah,
not always,
another
but
thing
usually.
is the sewers of Rome. Down below is the sewers of Rome, where even the more destitute poor live, and of course, the vampires.
The worms.
In any case, the fun bit about the necropolis is that during this entire fucking crazy shit that's going down with Caesar being assassinated, all this other shit, the city kind of gets a bit fiery, and the wonderful world of the vampires is interfered with as various vampires start moving on each other and using the crazy shit going on up above to help deal with the issues. Now, they then talk about the fact that the Romans don't consider any of the other clans to be actually true vampires. They're the Propaquini, but they're not kindred. Kindred is just the clan.
Yep, just the Julii.
Just the Julii. There's of course
look, there's a vampire on fire. I don't blame him.
Look at his face. He's like,
But yeah, long story short, all this change to Rome is shaking things up.
Yes.
The gang are coming here. Embraces a 15-year-old child. Good job, asshole.
Yep.
Suddenly it's a bad time to become a monster.
It really is.
Because guess what they start inventing for the Camarilla? Prescription, the red list. Prescription for you.
Also, funny thing about military dictatorships gunning into town, it becomes a lot harder to prey on people in the streets when there's battalions walking down the roads.
Yep. In any case, everything kind of happens at once. So Antony declares Caesar's son, the heir. All this sort of shit goes on. There's Actium. Octavian then becomes, of course, Augustus. Octavian also is modeling himself very much after Apollo, who was a very popular god at the time, and writing a bunch of propaganda.
I think this is a lot. Do you think we should cut at the first emperor?
Let's at least get to Emperors, Monsters, and Gods. It's literally a page away.
Okay, yeah. But I want to read the clans not of the Propaquini, because that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So Remus is the first of the kindred, and the kindred, as you know, are the first among the dead. But there are other lesser dead who share the same hunger but are not kindred. There are the worms, who are the barbarians in Britain Gaul called the worms of the earth, and who are called Nosferatu by the Cappadocians. They're not kindred. They just come out of their graves.
Yeah, they're just weird fucking
bestial ones. Gangrel curs who came here with Gauls and the Cimbrian, the Germans, and the Goth. They are the barbarian dead, who have no gods other than half-remembered mockeries of the true gods of Rome.
Then from the great lands of Asia, anywhere east, come the Deva.
The prostitutes, perverts who call themselves Deva,
and the bronze-skinned ones from the south go by the Maquette.
The Tenebrae, the shadows.
The shadow, the unwanted
They say they're only
guests.
1/9 part of a man, incomplete beings from whom all is departed save body and shadow, separated from the 7 parts of their being for all eternity and forced to feed in their need. They admit they are not
kindred. We tolerate
them. That is all.
I just wanted to read because that is
very Roman
segment. I love this little segment.
And it also stretches that other bit of Requiem that I mentioned, where that clan and blood is mutable. The very concept of the kindred at this point is literally one clan.
And the others are considered social peers, but not clan.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But as with Roman society, just because you weren't born that way doesn't mean you can't become born again.
So here we go. Emperors, Monsters, and God. So yeah, this is just we kind of covered this segment.
Yeah. which we're talking about Augustus. Now, the fun thing about Augustus
let's
is
start
that
with Augustus now.
he lives
golden
for a
age.
very long time, has a lot of scares that he's about to die, has basically all of his prospective heirs die, aside from one guy, which is Tiberius.
Tiberius is fine.
Yeah, he's fine. He'll be fine.
And I mean, by Emperor standards, he's honestly fine.
Yeah, but Emperor standards, it's not fucking hard.
Augustus kind of has a bit of a long run, and he ends up. The fun thing is that the Gates of War. He leaves a lot of these things. Our ancestors commanded that the gates of Janus Quirinus be closed when there was peace gained by victory throughout the whole of the Empire of the Romans, by land and sea. Before I was born, they are recorded to have been closed only twice since the city's foundation. While I was princeps, the Senate ordered them closed 3 times. I want to note this.
Neat.
This is true. They were the first time they were closed was after the first defeat of the enemies there. Then there's, I think, the one against the one of the Senate uprisings, then against Pompey. And this is when Pax Romanum begins, basically, because Augustus has essentially won completely.
Yep.
There is no one who is willing to oppose him for very obvious reasons.
They are. To become king without being king.
Yes, he does, and the Senate goes along with it because he is not only beloved by the people, but he's genuinely doing a lot of stuff for the city of Rome.
He's not a king. He's princeps Augustus, first among many.
Yeah, he notably says, "I'm not a king. I'm not a king, and I don't want to be a king. I'll just have the powers of what is mostly a king." He also controls Egypt entirely, which means he is the wealthiest man in the empire.
Also the world.
And he uses it to essentially bribe the Senate and essentially limit their power in a way that makes him think they have power.
Yeah.
Also, he spends a lot of money on the city of Rome itself, a lot of money.
It's the golden age of Rome. It's the golden age of Rome. The city.
The
city.
Yeah. The Pantheon, for example, is first built in this period. Again, Agrippa is the one that kind of commissions and helps design it, because Agrippa is Agrippa, and he's essentially the only friend of Octavian that's still alive.
More conviction from him, yeah.
Yeah, and anyway, let's get it, because we've been running a little too long. Long story short, everything's fine. And the only enemies that Augustus have are a bunch of mewling barbarians on the borders of civilization. What can they do? Oh, Varus, what the fuck? Varus, give back my legions.
Yeah, that's the
Varus,
one dark
you
spot
fucking
in
retard.
Augustus's reign.
Yeah.
Varus,
anyway, but essentially, while nothing collapses at the end of Augustus' reigns, the cracks are very visible, and by the time he dies, he hands off. He hands off while a very good position. It's a position fractured and very much showing already creaks in the creaks already.
It needs a little bit of work.
Work that is never actually given to it.
Yes, Varus. The fun thing is the Praetorian Guard are partially founded in this period, not really founded, but partially founded. The fun thing is that the Camarilla changes as well. The Camarilla is now linked to the Empire and the Emperor. The fact of the matter is that the Empire is so big that there's other kindred that are coming to Rome because their food's gone there. This sounds like a good place to go, right? And it's not easy for them to get there unless you're a gangrel, but they make their moves. They go up and come to Rome, and they're like, "Hey, nice place you got here. Like, what's going on?" And they're like, "Well, you're not kindred, but you can stay here. You just got to follow the rules. We'll tolerate you." And they're like, "Sweet." And
some of them were already there, but this is like where, say, the Mekhet would come in, the David would come in. Some gangrel, but this is early, so not many.
Well, the gangrel have always kind of been in the area anyway.
Yeah,
because they're the gangrel get fucking everywhere.
And the Gauls and shit. Yeah, and also the Nosferatu were pretty early on. Then
they're Greek, so they're there. The thing of the matter too is that then Augustus is inviolable. He ends a century of war and brings peace to Rome, at least for a while, and none truly challenge him for fear that should he die, the war that follows would never end. And they're not wrong on that. Like, if somebody had killed Augustus, there is zero chance that there would not have been a massive civil war immediately after. And no one wanted that. They were fucking sick of it. So he did bring peace.
And then he dies and Tiberius hates his fucking life.
Yes. So the fun thing is that, of course, Augustus has a dream one night, and once a year, on the anniversary of that dream, he sits alone on the steps of the Forum, asking for alms as if he were a beggar. Any man could kill him. There is no one watching. But no one does, and when night comes, the kindred, too, leave him unmolested. They recognize him as one touched by the hands of the gods. His death is out of the hands of the kindred. They know this. By the time Augustus is dead, nearly 5 decades have passed, and among the living, there are few who have any memory of what Rome was like without him.
Yep. And, oh god.
And Tiberius is a fucking piece of shit.
Yeah, oh god. It's been about 3.5 hours, my friends, so... Jesus Christ. This is one of the consequences of Rome, man.
Well,
yes.
And rambles.
This is a ramble.
Rome is 1,000 years old. Like, when we talk about Three Kingdoms period changeling, that's still not that long by comparison.
Three Kingdoms period changeling is what, like about a century and a half?
Yeah, about a century and a half. This is 1,000 years. We only just got to the Imperial Age. We haven't even gotten to the decline of the Camarilla. This is them actually coming into strength, because now that there's a centralized, great, gigantic fuck-off city
that is incredibly wealthy, that is building up, and that people are coming to from all over.
It's allowing them to intermingle for the first time, these separate walking dead that drink lifeblood.
They're all similar, but they're all different. That's the other thing to remember here. They're kindred, but they aren't. Right? By their own origin stories, they're very different and come from very different places. Their powers are different. Their blood is different.
Which is reflected by the different religions, because you have your standard traditional Roman celebratories, like your Vestal Virgins, your augurs reading the... And then you have the guy who chopped his willy off screaming, Magna Mater! Magna Mater! And then you got, like, people who worship the fertility goddess Isis of Egypt. And then you got other fuckers that worship, like, your old Celtic gods and all this other shit. And hell, around this time, you even run into a few random Jews and some people who follow some guy named Yeshua ben Yosef the Nazarene.
Not yet.
Not quite, but they're just starting.
That's about 50. No, they aren't even around yet. That's about 50 years.
No, I mean by the time Augustus is dead.
No. By the time Augustus dies, Jesus still isn't born yet.
Oh wow, yeah, I'm wrong.
Jesus is born during the reign of Tiberius.
Yeah, I'm a dope. We just got to there. That's why I was thinking of that.
Yeah.
Oh Lord. 3.5 hours. That's a fucking record almost, I think. I think there's like one other podcast we've done this long, guys.
Yeah, but we could easily go longer because it's Rome. Rome is really, 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 really important and really, really interesting and has a lot of detail and things to dig into.
For your Camarilla game, if you're gonna play Requiem of Rome, it's perfectly fair. Like, we went to the weeds, but I think we kind of had to.
We went into the weeds, and the game says you don't have to. But it's a good idea to go to the weeds occasionally to look in there and see if you can find anything that's fun.
Yeah, and like why X happened, or like what are some things you need to know. Like the prescription list, that's something you probably want to know, especially since the Camarilla use stuff like that.
Camarilla would certainly use stuff like that.
You might want to know how certain people came into power because of the way. That's why we went into so much damn detail about, well, the Triumvirate boys.
Because they're not only incredibly important, their echoes throughout the history and the city of Rome itself are very impactful. Especially, let's say you're running a game around Parthia.
Because the dead have long memories.
If you're running a game, say, around Parthia, you might run into, like, oh yeah, we've got to get Pompey's head back for some blood ritual.
Yeah. And I know we didn't really talk about vampires too much.
But the book doesn't really either.
The book doesn't in this stage. Like, they mostly do excerpts from the point of view of, like, a Cammy.
a Camarilla, or like talking a bit about like what's going on with the vampires? And the answer to that is usually they're just kind of hiding behind the scenes and taking a look and just seeing what's going on.
And as we continue more of this, I don't know when we'll pick this back up, but as we continue more, well, first off, we have to continue the glorious reign of emperors, because Tiberius, while not anywhere near as bad as some of the later ones, oh,
Tiberius is fun because Tiberius is an echo of what's to come. But also at the same time,
fuck Rome is screwed.
If you weren't among the elite, you were pretty okay during Tiberius's reign.
Yeah, but
well, that's why I say he was fine, all things considered.
Yeah, like he brought peace. He didn't start any major wars. The taxes weren't too bad.
So
yeah, he was weirdo, but
mind you, he did completely screw up the head of Little Boots.
Yeah, well, that kid was kind of fucked.
So yeah, I don't know.
Oh yeah, that's last little Roman fun fact if you didn't know. Little Boots. Yeah, Caligula. That's not his actual name. It's something Germanicus. Who gives a shit? No one remembers him. That is his actual name. He's called Caligula because when he was dragged along on military campaigns, he got mocked. He got mocked.
No, he wasn't mocked. He wasn't mocked at all. What it was that
he considered it mock. He considered it mocking.
Not really.
He hated this name.
The thing is that as a little boy, when he was following his father along on campaign, what had happened was that some legionaries made a little uniform for him, including marching boots, because he was a mascot basically. Because he's imitating his father, he's watching around, so of course it's like someone has the bright idea. Let's give this kid a little marching uniform, and a little cape, and little boots, and all that, and so thus the name popped up because it's more easy to say, and that's how people would recognize him as the Little Boots.
Yeah, but that name stuck
and
forever.
Yes, got tired of it.
He did. Caligula's also an interesting figure in that he's kind of okay for the first year of his reign.
Then he gets the plague or something.
Then he gets meningitis.
And then he decides to invest his whole reign into trolling everyone. But anyway, I don't know when we'll get back to Requiem for Rome. I do know I want to get back onto it at some point.
Yeah, it's a really good book. Like, it captures that whole thing of like, do you want to run during any of these periods? Here's a bunch of stuff for you. Do you want to like not care about history? It's okay. Just use this as a guidebook. This isn't like a history textbook. This is just a
chapter 1. Like, we only went as far as we did just because context. The rest of it just goes into factions, and I think you'll appreciate that more, since honestly, while it's fun to talk about stuff like how Pompey dishonored Caesar's wife, so Caesar's sister, I mean, and Caesar just kicks his ass because I need him alive. Little things like that. Accidentally getting murdered by the king of Egypt because he stupidly goes during a civil war. Yeah, that's fun. But I think you'll also appreciate how the camis are set up, and the fact that they're about to get destroyed by ghost owls. The
fall of the Camarilla is very much an echo of the fall of Rome. And that's one of the fun things about it, is that this leads directly into an adventure module called The Fall of the Camarilla, which explains a few things of like what happened after this period canonically. And it's like, well, the Camarilla fucked around in Byzantium for a while. It was still around until like 12, until the Crusaders came in and burned everything down. That's when that one ended.
They lasted that long.
Yeah, it's mentioned a bit in the book for the one we did on Constantinople. I would have had them
get what was it? I would have had them get cacked under Heraclius's revolts around that time.
Well, the city wasn't burned.
Fair.
That's the main thing. When Byzantium got fucking burned by the Crusaders, like remember, like 3/4 of the city burnt down.
Okay, that's fair.
Like that basically ends any vampires who got there. In terms of organization.
So anyway, I don't know what we're gonna do next week, and have a happy holidays, man.
Happy holidays to everyone. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever Kwanzaa term you want.
No one celebrates Kwanzaa, but
no one celebrates it.
If you do, have a happy
I'm pretty sure that there's some other weird holiday that's also celebrated around this time by somebody that isn't
I know that there's purity days in Hinduism around this time. I forgot the name of them. Oh,
and of
also,
course Festivus, the most important holiday of all.
Also, we have a Discord. You can go into the link down below, and you can click it, and insert like subscribable whatever nonsense here too.
Yes. Also, this book is available on DriveThruRPG.
I made a point to link it down there too. If you want to buy it, it is a solid recommend.
It is a very solid recommendation from us. This is one of my favorite books of the Requiem line, mostly because it handles about everything you really need for a game in this time, and it has a lot of very, very fun little factoids in it and little information and stuff that it's like it just clicks with the setting.
You either click with the setting, or you could be like, I could use this for my vampire group, like a prescription list. Oh, that'd be great. Like where they just list you as, oh, you just kill them, it's fine.
Yeah, it also it's very much like Vampire: The Dark Ages for Masquerade. It's a very interesting time and a very different way of approaching a vampire.
Anyway, I don't want this to be a 4-hour stream, so